Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 7th episode of the story in which Naruto is adopted at a young age. How far can he go if someone actually supports him? How will he influence the elemental nations? This story is from a writing bunny. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. Infirmary. Osamu was walking through the halls of the medical facility like a man who knew where he was going and who was supposed to be there 5 minutes ago, so please don't bother him with anything. The outfit he had procured from a storage closet was feeling a bit odd, not because Suna and IWA medical outfits differed too much, but because he couldn't find one in his size at such a short notice. He couldn't risk anyone catching him and asking him uncomfortable questions. It wasn't often a medic received an S-rank mission and he was determined to fulfill it. He flipped through the notebook he found in his new outfit's pocket, pretending to study the diagnosis of the patient he was about to treat. He suppressed a smirk at the thought of exactly what treatment he was going to give him. He always carried vials of poison along with medicines wherever he went. It wasn't hard to choose which one he would use today. It was one of his better creations, slow, but nearly undetectable and lethal once it entered the bloodstream. Even he didn't have the antidote. And what was better, it made the death seem like a natural heart failure. Only a medic of the highest caliber would be able to recognize the truth. He reached the door to his destination. He didn't pause to listen whether there was anybody inside. Such behavior would be suspicious in a doctor and he wanted to avoid that at all costs. He opened the door and paused. There was the target lying still on the bed, unmoving, unconscious and utterly defenseless. His teammates were lying on other beds in the room, out of it as well. So far so good. What wasn't so good was that their sensei was in the room as well, perfectly alert. What was even worse was that what seemed like the whole Konoha entourage was there, including the Hokage. And a Konoha medic was standing above his target, checking his vitals. It wasn't good, but he wasn't one to back off easily. "Excuse me," he said, drawing everyone's attention to him. "I have to administer medicine to the patient." "Which one would that be?" the Hokage asked. "Uzumaki Naruto," Osamu answered. "I've taken over his care," the Konoha medic interrupted. "I can decide myself what medication he gets." "But can you decide in time for the next dose?" It was the only thing Osamu could think of. His mind was racing, but it was going in circles. "Next dose of what?" the Konoha medic raised an eyebrow. "So far I found nothing but painkillers in his system and they are hardly vital. Since I worked on him before I think I can tell what he needs," Osamu said forcefully. "Since I am his physician for several years I can tell it better," the Konoha Mednin answered in an equally decisive tone. "And now please leave, I would like to conduct my examination in peace." Osamu cursed inwardly. This wasn't going well. He racked his brain for something to change the medic's mind, but the glares the other occupants of the room were giving him made it very hard. "You should get out," a giant black dog with an eye patch suggested. "I don't like the way you smell." The false Suna medic almost jumped at the sight of a talking canine and it wasn't only due to the rows of sharp teeth that were revealed. "I'll be going then." He backed out of the room and closed the door. This mission failed, but at least they couldn't blame either him or his village for anything. He sighed. He really wasn't looking forward to reporting to the Tsuchikage. Inside the room the Konoha delegation looked at each other. "What was that about?" the youngest of them, Kiba, asked puzzled. "He smelled of deceit and fear," Kuramaru clarified. The only one of the Himura triplets currently awake barked in confirmation. "Somehow I don't think he really was a Suna medic," the Konoha medic said. "I agree," Sarutobi nodded solemnly, "but there isn't much we can do about it. We are only guests in this village and he didn't actually do anything. But from now on there would be at least 2 guards in this room all the time." The elderly Hokage hoped it would be enough. If this really was an assassination attempt, he would bet he knew who was behind it. Hell, even Tsunade would win such a bet. And he had put such high hopes in mending their relationship with IWA. There still was tomorrow's banquet, but a miracle would have to happen to make Oanoki forget his wounded grandson. And if he was suspecting something, it would be downright impossible. Once again, Sarutobi was reminded that he was getting too old for this crap. A few rooms away, I see, Oanoki said frowning. Your incompetence caused us quite a problem. Now get lost. Osamu bowed deeply and left the room as fast as was polite. The Tsuchikage ignored the look of relief on the medic's face. The man caused him a lot of headache. Why couldn't that man finish that blonde brat? A quick flick of the wrist and a poisoned needle was all it would take. But perhaps he was being too harsh. With old Sarutobi there, and who are you calling old, you fossil, he thought, he would have been caught before the Senbon would leave his hand, and even if he could hit, that little Jinchuriki had already survived what should have been a fatal wound. Then not only nothing would be gained, but they would start a war with Konoha. And he couldn't afford that now. Not when Akatsuchi was still lying here unconscious, defenseless, hostage to the peace. He couldn't afford to do anything before he got his grandson safely to IWA. He sighed and rubbed his temples. This was getting to him too much. If he could just drop the responsibility on someone else, he wasn't getting any younger. But he didn't have anyone he would trust IWA with. There were strong ninja in Hidden Rock, but with every one of them there was a sound reason why he shouldn't become the Yondaime Tsuchikage. If only his son was still alive. But he wasn't, and the Sandaime remembered exactly whose fault it was. He scowled. He was Ryotenbin no Oanoki, and he never backed down from anything. And while he might be old, he was far from useless. He was going to deal with the problem, one way or another. He needed only a plan, and he was always good with those. He started plotting. Naruto's mindscape. The world around him was dark and wet, water dripping from old rusty pipes. He recognized the corridor he stood in. Normally he wouldn't be excited to visit this place, but now he didn't mind. He wanted to have a few choice words with the Kyuubi anyway. He strode down the desolate hallways determinedly, soon reaching the cage housing the demon. He could see the giant kitsune curled on its side, tails wrapped around its body, obviously sleeping. Naruto scowled. He was wounded and bleeding, and that infernal furball was sleeping. Wasn't he worried he might die at all? Hey, Fox. No response. I'm talking to you, Fuzzball. The kitsune stirred. A huge red eye opened and locked with Naruto. So you're back, the demon growled. Have you come to accept my offer? As if. He shouted defiantly. He was angry and he wanted the demon to know it. Then there's no reason for you to be here, the Kyuubi replied, curling back to sleep. I'm talking to you, the blonde yelled. Well, I'm not talking to you, the Ninetales responded, closing his eyes. Don't you fall asleep on me. Naruto screamed. What little patience he had was running low. Tell me, what was today supposed to mean? Why didn't you heal me? And why should I? The creature asked, cracking one eye open. You made it perfectly clear that you want nothing of me, so I gave you nothing. How do you like it? It's quite a change feeling so weak, isn't it? Bastard, Naruto uttered. Have you forgotten that if I die you would too? No, but you weren't in danger of dying today. The creature looked completely unconcerned. It was a perfect opportunity to prove my point. So do you accept my offer now, or are you still adamant on being stubborn? And just why should I do anything you say? The Jinchuriki scowled. And besides, the IWA girl seemed dead set on killing me. So you noticed? It looked like the Kyuubi was raising an eyebrow, despite having none. Then perhaps you should consider, what does that mean for you? Like what? Naruto had the distinct feeling he was missing something, but for the life of him he couldn't put a finger on what it was. He didn't like that one bit. Cannot you tell? For a moment I almost thought there was a lone brain cell in that tiny head of yours. Obviously, I must have been mistaken. The Kyuubi's voice sounded even more taunting than usual. Do you have to be so enigmatic? Naruto's supply of patience was almost out now. Why can't you simply say what you mean? I do, the monster replied. It's not my fault that you are unable of processing complicated information. Smart ass. The young blonde was fuming now. Thank you. The kitsune actually looked pleased. Naruto scowled. You're not helping any. That I'm not, Kyuubi grinned. I'm a demon, remember? Since when are demons supposed to help anyone? You're an overgrown plushie, the child muttered under his breath. And what were you talking about earlier? What makes you think I'll tell you after you just called me a plushie? A dangerous low growling resounded through the chamber. You're insulting me all the time. Naruto paid no heed to the demon's dangerous mood. He was, after all, the one behind the bars. I'm not. I'm merely stating the facts, the Ninetales replied calmly. He kept his voice even only because he knew it would piss off his jailer more than any temper tantrum. I hate you. The child was glaring daggers at him. He decided he liked his powerless rage very much. I don't care, he shrugged in the most bored tone he could muster. And now get out. I want to sleep. You can sleep all the time in here. Naruto yelled. Why do you have to sleep now? I don't have to, he corrected. I want to. Bitch. The kid's pout was really hilarious. He almost started laughing. I'm not female, he pointed out calmly. That's not what I meant, the boy replied. I know. He was really enjoying this. Naruto saw the conversation was going nowhere. So are you going to heal me or not? Demanding little brat, wasn't he? But it changed nothing. Are you going to accept my offer or not? You should know by now that nothing is ever for free, Kit. That's not for free, the blonde nuisance stated. You're getting to live a little longer for it. In this nice and comfortable dwelling? Kyuubi looked pointedly around his prison. That's not nearly enough for having to deal with such a rude brat as you. What were you hinting at before? Naruto changed the topic. About that IWA girl. Do you smell trouble ahead? Why should I tell you? The fox cocked his head sideways. Go and figure it out for yourself. You fancy yourself a smart boy, don't you? So you do. Naruto said triumphantly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The genin smiled. Bringing it up was enough. And if there really is trouble ahead, don't you think you'd have a better chance of survival if your host is healthy? Even though this is correct, I didn't say that there was that much trouble ahead, the demon drawled. But you think there is. Once Naruto decided on something, it was hard to convince him otherwise. I think you're trying my patience. He growled to punctuate his words. Really? The blonde asked sarcastically. I almost didn't notice. You really shouldn't be doing this, brat. The Kyuubi leaned closer to the bars. You already got a taste what it means when I'm mildly displeased with you. Do you want to find out what I do when I'm angry with somebody? Naruto suddenly realized that he really didn't want it. Too bad he forgot to talk to Tenzo about the demon's deal. Now he had no idea what the implications of accepting would be. You know what? The Konoha genin sighed in exasperation. We obviously aren't getting anywhere. So let's just leave the things as they are and let's see who of us is bothered more, I for being weak or you for being stuck in a weak host. Call it a game of chicken, if you want, but this is how I'm going to do it. How dare you, roared the fox. This didn't go as he wanted. Naruto paid it no heed. He swiftly left the mindscape. Infirmary. When Naruto woke up, everything hurt but he could move without hindrance. Does it mean that my wounds weren't serious, or did the furball really chicken out? He didn't know, and he definitely didn't want to ask. He surveyed the room he was in. His whole team was there, the girls sleeping on their beds, Tenzo on a chair, one ANBU standing near the window. He wondered what had happened to them. He had been out during their semi-final battles and he had passed out before he could ask. Speaking of his own match, he couldn't remember its ending, so that meant he had lost. He was a bit disappointed, but not too much. He had never expected to win the Chunin exams tournament anyway. Simply getting into the final was more than enough. I wonder who made Chunin, he mused. I really wish the girls succeeded. And perhaps even me? He wasn't sure what he felt about it. On one hand, it was an accomplishment few ever achieved and something he could brag, if he had someone who would listen to him. On the other hand, he knew that being Chunin was a lot harder than being Genin and he wasn't sure whether he was ready. He sat up and hissed in pain. His wounds obviously weren't as healed as he had thought. The sound roused Tenzo. The Jounin opened his eyes. Awake already? Yes, Naruto answered and grimaced. Speaking hurt. That's good, because I want to talk to you. Oh, Naruto thought. Those words said in that tone never bode well. What was that stunt yesterday supposed to mean? What stunt? Naruto asked, trying to look innocent, even though he knew very well what his sensei was referring to. I mean the final match, the Jounin clarified. What did you think, going out there wounded? And why didn't you quit when you were hurt? Naruto tried to look as small as possible. He didn't have an answer for that, certainly not one his guardian would accept. You didn't think, that's why, Tenzo scolded. Naruto looked guilty. I thought you had more common sense than this, but obviously I was mistaken. There are a lot of lessons about rushing headfirst into danger and needlessly coming in the future. I'm sorry, the blonde peeped. And don't try the puppy dog eyes on me, the wood user scolded. They don't work anymore. Should I lock you in a cage again? Naruto sighed. He wasn't getting off the hook this time. I have to talk to you about something as well. Oh? His guardian raised an eyebrow. What is it? Does he have to be here? Naruto eyed the ANBU suspiciously. I'm afraid so, the Jounin answered. Hokage's orders. Why? The blonde was startled. Does he fear we'll try to run or what? Tenzo sighed. He didn't want to burden his charge with such matters, but it was important for Naruto to know, otherwise he'll do something stupid again. While you were asleep, a suspicious man came here, he began. He claimed to be a medic who should administer your medicine, but there was nothing about it in your card. And our own medic was looking you over at the time. There wasn't much we could do about it besides sending him away. We can't investigate it, but we suspect he was an assassin. But why me? The blonde asked, seriously unsettled. In the moment he looked like lost young child. Can't you tell? Naruto had a few ideas, why some people would try to kill him. Is it someone from Suna? I thought they were too scared. Or perhaps IWA. I didn't get the boy that bad, did I? I heard he was in coma and it was doubtful whether he would wake, Tenzo explained. Oh. There was nothing to say to it. Then he remembered a small snippet of gossip he heard in the finalists' booth. Isn't he related to the Tsuchikage? He's his grandson, the Mokuton user explained. Oh. Crap. The Jinchuriki thought about the implications. Crap indeed, the former ANBU agreed. So you understand why you shouldn't wander off alone again? Yes, Naruto nodded. And would you stay where I tell you to stay like a good boy, or do you want to have disobeying Hokage's direct orders on your record? No, the genin answered, not spotting the trap. What? You wouldn't do what you're told? No. I would. Naruto protested. Now that's it, Tenzo nodded contentedly. So what was it you wanted to talk to me about? Nothing. His eyes once again strayed to the ANBU guard in the corner. He felt uncomfortable talking about the Kyuubi even when they were alone. He didn't think he could do it in front of a stranger. Really? The Jounin prodded. But you said there was something. It's not that important, the boy shrugged. I can tell you later. Well then, but don't forget about it. I won't, Naruto promised. Oh, and one more thing, Tenzo said. Naruto instantly went on alert. What is it? Your friend was asking for you. Gaara? The blonde perked up. He was here. Yes, the older man confirmed, but you were still in the surgery. Where are you going? Naruto was already out of the bed. Tenzo grabbed him and put him back in. You aren't going anyway. You can see him this evening on the banquet. What banquet? The banquet, where the results would be announced, the former ANBU explained. So would you be a good boy and rest so you'll strong enough to attend, or would you try to run and miss it because you'd be stuck in the hospital? I'll be a good boy, Naruto decided. That's good to hear. And now go back to sleep. Naruto muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, no fun, but didn't argue any further. Infirmary. Both girls woke up during the afternoon. When they realized they were supposed to attend a banquet with foreign nobility in only a couple of hours and they were still in their hospital gowns, dirty and bloody and their hair matted and knotted, they went frantic. They both tried to get to the nearest bathroom to clean themselves up, much to the chagrin of the nurses. They tried to get their wayward patients back to their beds first by reasoning and when it failed then force, but Hana set her dogs on them. Even if only one of the Haimaru was able to respond to her command, it was enough to drive the nurses away. Then Tenzo appeared and dragged them bodily to their beds, saying that they wouldn't go to the banquet at all if they reopened their wounds. That made the girls calm down, but they still looked distinctively unhappy. Then their things were delivered and they remembered they didn't take anything sufficiently formal. Hataru wanted to hit the shops at the last minute, but Tenzo told her a resolute no, much to her chagrin. Then the rest of the Inuzuka family showed up and Tsum took command of things. Then, even though it seemed unbelievable, everybody managed to prepare for the grand occasion. The girls still grumbled that they weren't dressed up nice enough and they didn't have time to make their hairdos elaborate enough and their makeup still needed some more work, but they admitted they were all presentable now, though barely. It might have been because Tsum threatened to set Kuramaru on them if they didn't stop complaining. Naruto couldn't see what their problem was. In his opinion they both looked beautiful. They made their way to the Kazekage's manor. It took them a long time, with all three genin being wounded, but their legs were still in working order so they managed. They quickly mingled into the crowd of formally dressed people inside the richly decorated room, looking for any acquaintances, exchanging some last-minute taunts with fellow Chunin hopefuls. They tasted the delicious food prepared on the side tables, but their hearts weren't really in it. They were only waiting for the results to be announced. Sunegakure's hospital. A figure was lying motionless on the bed, various machines beeping as they monitored its life functions. Two guards were standing nearby, listening to the soft sounds the hospital equipment made, trying to fend off the boredom. They didn't think anybody would try to harm their charge, but they didn't want to even think about what their Kage would do to them if they failed their duty. Suddenly the door opened and the two guards straightened. Finally something to break their monotonous routine. It was only a doctor. He probably just came in to check on the patient and wasn't dangerous, but orders were orders and they wouldn't dare disobey them. Halt, one of the guards said. Show me your identification. Do I have to? The medic grumbled, but started digging through his pockets, encouraged by the fierce scowl on the guard's face. Where did I put it? I would have sworn it was here. Or was it my other coat? Look, Do I really have to go back and search for it? I'm supposed to administer the treatments now. Yes. The guards were now suspicious. The man looked like a textbook example of somebody who was trying to sneak somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. But on the other hand, they never ever saw anybody actually use such poor excuse. So maybe this really was only a doctor who had forgotten his identification? Either show us your identification now or leave, the second guard ordered, stepping forward. Oh, here it is, the medic smiled as his fingers reached something in his inner pocket. The guard stiffened. Wasn't he trying to pull out a weapon? But no, it was only a regular identification card. One of the guards inspected it closely. It seems all right, he decided. I'm glad you say so, the medic replied with a hint of sarcasm. Can I treat the patient now? Yes, of course. The guard waved him in. The doctor presented no danger. They relaxed. Big mistake. In the next second they both died. Kazakage's manor Gaara was making his way towards the place of celebration. The people around were giving him odd and frightened looks, but nobody tried to stop him. The sand whirling around his feet let them know it would be a bad idea. The guards at the door looked like they did want to stop him, but one look sent them scurrying out of his way. He entered the ballroom. He stopped near the threshold and observed the people mingling around. He had never been to a celebration before, so everything was new for him. The sound of multiple voices, the sight of ornate dresses, the smells of rare and expensive food. It also happened that there wasn't anybody from Suna in his vicinity, so his appearance didn't cause immediate panic, the foreign dignitaries not knowing who he was. Shikaku demanded their blood for the insolence. Gaara paid him no mind. He was getting used to ignoring his tenant, though it was still hard. He would have indulged in the novel sensation longer, but then he spotted a familiar figure. He quickly made his way over to him. Hello, Gaara, Naruto greeted with a smile. Hello, Naruto, the redhead replied with his usual impassive face. They exchanged a few pleasantries, or at least tried to, because Gaara was still socially awkward. There were loads of things they wanted to discuss, but didn't want anybody to overhear. The look some people were sending their way didn't help any. They found a place near the corner of the room. Fewer people were around and they could talk in relative privacy without violating Tenzo's orders of not going anywhere alone. There's something I don't understand, the tattooed youth started. Why didn't you just use your tenant's power to crush your opposition? Your sensei said something about an order, but I don't think that's the real reason. Naruto paused for a moment. It wasn't that he had to think about the answer, but because he didn't know whether he could afford to say it aloud. His eyes flickered around the room. Anybody around could be a spy. On second thought, everybody around who happened to overhear anything would happily report it to their respective superiors, so it didn't matter which one of them had espionage as their main occupation. You're right, he answered. The main reason is that he is difficult to deal with. How difficult? He cooperates only when he gets some benefits out of it, Naruto explained. He saves my hide, because he's also saving his own, but his only concern is getting out. He's always trying to convince me to do something to weaken the seal and gets pissed when I refuse. He threatens to withdraw his support to show me how much I depend on him. That's why I don't use his power if I don't have to. The supply can be cut anytime and then I'm in trouble. He didn't think it would be wise to admit that it had already happened. Gaara looked thoughtful. Shikaku never does anything of that sort. He's always eager to help, as long as he gets some bloodshed out of it. They have different priorities then, Naruto deduced. Though Kyubi loves bloodshed as well, but not as much as he would love getting out. Strange thing, the tattooed youth mused, Shikaku is never concerned with this. Strange indeed, the blonde agreed. They spent more time talking, until they called the finalists to gather, so the results could be announced. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with politics. It couldn't be any other way with so many nobles and dignitaries present. Every single one of them had their own agenda and they were relentless in pursuing it, as long as they followed the proper protocol, of course. Talks were going on, conducted in proper diplomatic language, comprehensible only to those concerned. In one corner of the room the three Kage were standing. Their discussion was perhaps the most underlined by tension. Not only were the stakes the highest, it wasn't purely about politics anymore. On one side the Hokage was trying to make peace. He was willing to make quite a lot of concessions if it meant soothing the Tsuchikage's temper. Opposite him was the Tsuchikage, who was quite content to take any offerings the Hokage made to him. He had already devised a plan of getting rid of Konoha's little yellow menace and anything else gained would be a bonus. In the middle was caught the Kazekage, who was trying to make sure the other two didn't try to kill each other and prayed they wouldn't start the fourth great Shinobi war within his village. By the way, they were unable to come to any conclusion. The possibility didn't seem too far off. Finally his nerves couldn't take it anymore. Even dealing with Gaara wasn't as stressful as this. He interrupted the two bickering, negotiating, Kage and said that the Chunin exams results would be announced soon. He prayed the brief reprieve would allow them to calm down, because if not, things might turn very ugly very soon. The dais finally, the moment everyone was waiting for, arrived. 11 of the 12 finalists were lined up near the dais, waiting to hear whether they earned their promotions. Hokage was standing, but several of them were still injured and had to sit down. Opposite them the three Kage and several daimyo were standing or sitting. Everybody was tense with expectation. There were those who knew they had performed poorly, but there was a shard of hope in each of them. What if it was enough after all? There were those who were certain they did well, but a sliver of doubt lingered in their hearts. What if it wasn't enough after all? Then there were those who were neither too bad or too good and honestly had no idea whether they made it or not, but they still hoped. And there was one person who didn't care either way. Kuratsuchi had lost any interest in promotion the moment her brother was wounded. Since that moment, she cared only about his health and avenging him. She shot a glance to her left. There was that blonde brat, standing like he didn't have a care in the world, while poor Akatsuchi was wasting away on a hospital bed. She was so mad she couldn't get him in the final, but that stupid puppeteer had to hit her with his poison Senbon. Maybe she should exact her revenge on him as well. She restrained herself from gritting her teeth. Only her grandfather's assurance that he had already planned how to deal with the yellow menace allowed her to remain outwardly calm. That and the thought of her brother. They couldn't really do anything until he was safe in Iwa. But then everything would be a different matter. The Tsuchikage told her that he had already planned how to do so. Just make them leave the safety of their village. It would be easy. He had studied the specialization of their team and decided what kind of situation to create that they would be sent to deal with it. And then she would have her chance at revenge. Grandfather had already promised her to be a part of the team that would lay in wait for them. Her musings were cut short when the Kazekage started speaking. Greetings to everybody who came here today. In front of you stand the outstanding young shinobi, who were competing for Chunin promotion. The results will be announced now. He made a dramatic pause. The gathered guests were quiet during his speech, so the sound of door opening was heard clearly. Many people turned to see which latecomer was disturbing the occasion. Kuratsuchi thought her eyes were deceiving her. She blinked, but the image stayed the same. Yes, it was Akatsuchi standing in the doorway. She would never mistake his huge figure for anybody else. He was once again dressed in his usual ninja gear, which was completely improper for such event, but this time she didn't even think of reprimanding him. She was so glad to see him up and about that she almost forgave the one who had hurt him. Almost. He still had to pay for scaring her so. Akatsuchi started walking towards them. A huge grin spread on Kuratsuchi's face. It was all she could do not to squeal like a little girl and run and hug him. But she was the Tsuchikage's granddaughter and she had to behave in a dignified manner no matter the circumstances. Akatsuchi walked closer. She noticed he was moving a bit oddly, but she chalked it off as result of his recent injuries. Then her brother was near the dais, but instead of standing near her and Kajiramaru, he headed over to the Konoha team. Kuratsuchi's smile froze on her lips. What was he doing? Why didn't he even greet her? Then Akatsuchi attacked. Naruto's eyes widened when he realized what was going to happen. At first he had been relieved to see the big IWA genin up and about, it meant that Tsuchikage wouldn't be so mad at him. But then Akatsuchi turned to him and he saw his eyes. His breath caught in his throat. They were strange, almost glassy. He was prepared for rage or hatred, but not this emptiness. Then the redhead struck. Naruto had just enough warning to avoid his fist. He hissed in pain. His wounds hadn't fully healed yet. He mentally cursed the Kyuubi for being so difficult. The fox really couldn't pick a worse time for giving him an ultimatum. But then again, it probably was a good time as far as the kitsune was concerned. The IWA genin pressed his attack and this time Naruto couldn't avoid it. He managed to block, but his arm nearly broke from the force of the impact. Was he that strong before? Hana attacked Akatsuchi, but she was still weak from her injuries and he didn't even twitch. Then Kuratsuchi joined the fight and forced her to back off. The Deus Ryotenbin no Oanoki couldn't believe what he was seeing. His grandson was well again? How did it happen? The medics had agreed that his recovery was an extremely unlikely occurrence. And by the way, why wasn't he informed before? Then he noticed the strange gait in Akatsuchi's step. Was it due to his wounds or was this somebody only pretending to be Akatsuchi? If so, it was an extremely tasteless joke and he was going to explain to that person why he shouldn't have done it in great detail. He quickly checked for henge or genjutsu. Nothing. Was it really his grandson miraculously healed or was the person simply that good? Then Akatsuchi, or whoever it was wearing his face, turned towards the blonde Konoha brat and he knew things were about to get ugly. In that one moment, he knew what Akatsuchi was going to do. Unfortunately for the midget man, something kept him rooted in place. He opened his mouth to shout an order, but before the first syllable could leave his lips, Akatsuchi acted. He could only watch with dread as a fight broke between the genin. Order, called the Kazekage. Some of the genin looked like they wanted to obey, but Akatsuchi was relentless in his attack. The blonde Jinchuriki was sent flying right into the group of Suna genin, hitting the Kaneko boy, sending him sprawling on the ground. Akira whined in pain as Naruto hit his wounded ribcage. Kuratsum took the assault on his master personally and bit the blonde boy in the leg before he could get up. Naruto used his free leg to kick the panther in the neck. It refused to let go. Akatsuchi clasped his hands in a seal, with speed greatly exceeding anything he had showed during the exams. Naruto knew it was time to dodge, but he couldn't. Kuratsum held him tight. A spike rose from the ground, racing towards him. The only thing he could do was brace himself for the impact. It never came. Tenzo had tackled Akatsuchi, making him release the jutsu. The big IWA genin tried to punch him, but the former ANBU was faster. He evaded the fist and drew his sword. That was when the Tsuchikage entered the fray, sending Tenzo crashing into a wall which was quite far away. Akatsuchi used the brief reprieve to launch himself at Naruto, who was still struggling to get away from Kuratsum. Naruto reacted purely on instinct. He drew a deep breath and screamed. The stream of chakra-sharpened air hit the advancing genin head-on, cutting deep into his skin. It wasn't enough to stop his progress. He slammed into Naruto at full speed. The Konoha Jinchuriki was knocked into the ground painfully. He struggled to regain his breath, but the giant body lying on him was slowly suffocating him. The only positive he could find about this situation was that Kuratsum finally let go. Then the weight was suddenly gone and he recognized one of the Hokage's Anbu standing above him. He could see the bleeding form of Akatsuchi getting up, readying for another attack. The ballroom Sarutobi couldn't believe what was happening. One moment they were peacefully celebrating the end of the Chunin exams, the next pandemonium erupted. And the worst thing about it was that nobody seemed to know what exactly was going on. How did Tsuchiki's supposedly comatose grandson suddenly appear? If he wasn't mistaken, even the Tsuchiki himself looked startled by it. And why had he attacked Naruto? But soon it didn't matter anymore. More and more people were joining the fray and in no time members of every village present were involved. The civilians were screaming and trying to run, effectively jamming the door. Nobody knew what was going on, but the Sandaime Hokage knew one thing. His dream of peace just went out of the window. Back of the room Temari was scared, though she would smash her giant fan on the head of anybody who would suggest such a thing. Despite being a ninja, she had never been in a real fight. She had done one C-rank mission, but that had been guarding a caravan nobody had bothered to attack. Now she found herself in the middle of an all-out battle between shinobi much more experienced than her, including 3 of the 5 Kage and 2 Jinchuriki. Despite her pride in her abilities, she knew she was hopelessly outclassed here. And to make matters worse, the daughter of their daimyo was hanging on her arm, blabbering frantically about being terrified and being too young to die and so on. Temari wanted to smack her on the head, but couldn't. She was a shinobi of Suna and it was her duty to protect their daimyo's family, no matter how much she hated them. She cursed the fact that as the Kazekage's daughter she was obliged to entertain the daimyo's daughter, because the girl was insufferable in the best of circumstances, always prattling something about the latest court scandals and fashions, things Temari had no knowledge about, and expecting her to comment about it properly. A small part of her was almost glad when the fighting broke out. The bigger one reminded her that she didn't take her war fan to the banquet. "Calm down," she said. She didn't know whether she was addressing the princess or herself. They both needed to calm down. The young noblewoman barely reacted. If anything, she clutched Temari's arm tighter. "Calm down," the young kunoichi repeated in a more forceful tone, accenting it by shaking the terrified girl's shoulder. It seemed to get through. The daimyo's daughter stopped blabbering and instead stared at Temari with impossibly wide eyes. "We need to get out of here," she commanded. The princess nodded. Temari surveyed the room. The center stage was where the heaviest fight was taking place. The 2 doorways were hopelessly jammed by panicking crowds trying to get out. Making a hole in the wall was outside her ability. The only option left was trying to squeeze through one of the windows. They were small, but so were the girls. She started dragging the Wind Princess towards the nearest one. The girl followed her unquestioningly. They made it halfway there when someone started shooting jutsu. Temari swore. The first lightning blast, or whatever it was, headed the opposite direction, but soon somebody returned the fire. Temari could only watch hopelessly as a fireball headed straight for them. Her instincts kicked in and she tried to jump out of the way, but the panicking young noblewoman hanging on her arm prevented her from getting anywhere. And she didn't know any technique that would save her from a fire attack. She closed her eyes and waited for the heat to envelope her. It didn't happen. She experimentally opened one eye. What she saw made her pause. There was a wall of sand protecting her from the flames. "Gaara," she whispered disbelievingly. Sure enough, there was her youngest brother standing with an arm outstretched, commanding the sand to their protection. "You should leave," he stated. She nodded. That was one thing they agreed on. "Come," she commanded the princess. The girl didn't respond. She only stared blankly ahead. Shell shock, Temari deduced from her limited medical knowledge. She sighed. Dragging around a deadweight was the last thing she needed, but it wasn't like she had a choice. Even in her state the young noblewoman held on her tightly. Temari slapped her. It had no effect on the princess, but it made her feel better. She hauled her unresponsive charge to the window. Getting her through would be a pain, but it would be an excellent opportunity to ruffle the snotty princess's exterior a bit without getting reprimanded for it. The noblewoman totally deserved it for the conversation Temari had to endure. Now she only had to make it before Gaara decided to stop protecting her. Near the dais Oenoki had been at first confused, but that didn't last long. One couldn't lead a shinobi village through several wars without being able to adapt to any situation quickly. So he quickly abandoned wondering whether the bleeding form on the ground was really his grandson or not. The melee fight that broke around was an excellent opportunity. He could end the threat to Iwa and his family here and now. He sneaked between his guards, his hands already forming seals. The blonde brat was just getting up, but his leg was bleeding badly. Good. He wouldn't be able to dodge, if a genin dodging an attack from a Kage wasn't a ridiculous idea to begin with. Jin-tun, Genkai Hakuri no Jutsu. A small cube formed in his mouth, quickly getting bigger and heavier. He watched the brat's eyes widen in fear as he tried to get out of the way. There was no way he could make it. Then instincts finally honed from decades on various battlefields warned him and he jumped aside, narrowly avoiding an arm crackling with lightning. A millisecond later and it would have pierced his lungs. He tried to hit the attacker with the half-formed dust cube, but he moved out of range too fast. His attack crushed into the ground harmlessly. He cursed. The blonde menace used the time to get lost in the crowd. He couldn't see him anywhere. It was times like these he hated his small stature. The ballroom Naruto was breathing heavily. The Tsuchikage himself had just tried to kill him. If it wasn't for one of the Hokage's Anbuyu's quick action, he would have been a smear on the floor. It was up time to get out of here. But he couldn't go until he knew his teammates were safe. He could see Hana still fighting off Kuratsuchi. Tsum had come to her assistance and together they forced the Iwa Kunoichi to retreat. Kiba was standing beside them, trying to look less scared than he felt. The Inuzuka trio was making their way out. But where was Hotaru? He couldn't see her anywhere. He carefully made his way to where he saw her last. And sure there she was, lying on the ground, trying to crawl away. Blood was seeping through her bandages. The wounds from her fight with Kuratsuchi must have reopened. Hotaru, he called her. She turned her head to him. Naruto, she whispered. He quickly ran to her. I'll get you out, he promised, trying to lift her. It wasn't easy, the girl was much bigger than him. But he managed to get her on his shoulders, even though her feet dragged on the floor. Let's go, he said, trying to get them out of the mess. Look out! Hotaru shouted. Naruto dropped down just in time for the kunai to narrowly miss them. They rolled on the floor, quickly untangling themselves. Here he is! Kuratsuchi shouted, descending upon them. Naruto reached for his ninjato and only when his fingers grabbed thin air he realized he didn't take it to the celebration. Crap, that wasn't good. But he still wasn't defenseless. He reached into his pockets and withdrew 2 kunai. He wasted no time charging them with wind chakra. He stood on guard, ignoring the pain in his wounded leg, waiting for the Iwa Kunoichi to attack. Kajiramaru. Come here. I found him. The Iwa genin was trying to sneak away before things got even messier, but his teammates' shout stopped him. He cursed inwardly. He wasn't interested in the petty vendetta of the Tsuchikage's family and wanted nothing to do with it. But on the other hand, if he killed the Konoha child, it might bring prestige back to his clan, and prestige was something the Kamizuru sorely needed. He released his hive and made his way over to his teammate. Naruto stiffened when he heard the sound of approaching bees. He had seen enough during the finals to know what the danger was. He couldn't afford to pull any punches here. He jumped towards Kuratsuchi, wind blades extending from his kunai. She recognized the danger and jumped back. The bees sounded closer, too close for his comfort. They were coming from somewhere on his right. He turned that way and saw the black dots nearing them rapidly. He dropped his kunai and ran his hands through the seals for futon, breakthrough. The insects were blown away. He had no time to celebrate. Kuratsuchi had jumped at him, kunai ready to strike. He tried to evade, but a sharp pain ran through his injured calf. He stumbled. He barely had time to raise his arms to block the attack before the furious girl slammed into him. They both fell to the ground. Kuratsuchi tried to stab him again, but he managed to block her. He channeled wind chakra to his hands. He tried to form blades, but he found it too difficult to concentrate and couldn't make them long. He hit the girl, but couldn't inflict anything worse than skin-deep wounds. I really have to come up with something better, he decided. But I have to get out of this alive first. Before he could do anything, there was a flash of lightning and Kuratsuchi screamed and fell off him. He turned his head to see what happened. Hataru was sitting there, her arms still outstretched after releasing the technique. Thanks, he called to her. There wasn't time for anything else. Kajiramu and his bees were approaching. Near the dais Kakashi was cursing himself. Whatever had possessed him to attack the Tsuchikage? The silver-haired man knew he was good, and it meant something even if he said so himself, but he still couldn't quite measure up to a Kage. Not by a long shot. And Ryatenbin no Oanoki was somebody even his sensei had respect for, despite never meeting him in battle. So here he was now, his Sharingan eye uncovered and spinning, frantically trying to avoid the attack from the midget man. Oanoki himself was furious. He had recognized the masked Konoha Anbu by his signature technique. He knew he was facing Hatake Kakashi, last surviving student of the thrice-accursed Yellow Flash. And if he couldn't get the little yellow brat today, the silver-haired Jounin would serve as a good replacement. The young prodigy might be good, but he was still no match for him. He could already see how the man's dodges were becoming more and more last moment. It wouldn't take long and one of his attacks would hit him. A hint of hot air on his back was the only warning he had before a fire dragon slammed into the ground where he was standing just a millisecond before. He turned to find his new attacker in the crowd. It looked like old Sarutobi finally decided to join the fun. This wasn't good. But they still had an ace in the hole. Banquet battle. The Kazekage felt like tearing his hair out. He had suspected that the dream come true the Chunin exams in Suna could turn into a nightmare, but even in his wildest dreams he wouldn't have imagined it would be this bad. He had no idea how the comatose Iwa Genin had miraculously healed or what possessed him to attack the damned Konoha Jinchuriki in public, but he had no doubts about the repercussions of such action. There was only one possibility: war. Even now there was fighting everywhere, the ninja hauling kunai and jutsu at each other, the civilian screaming and trying to run from the room, the floor littered with bodies of people hit with stray techniques. Judging by their ornate garments, there were quite a few noblemen among the casualties. Their families and friends would demand vengeance, and some of them would have quite interesting ideas about who was responsible for the massacre occurring. There was nothing that could be done about it now. And with Suna in the state it currently was thanks to their fool of a daimyo, their chances weren't good. Speaking of their ruler, the fat man was currently being carried to the door by two of his guards, the men struggling under their violently shaking burden. The other bodyguards were standing around, prepared to block anything that would head their way. There was a slight distortion in the air. The Kazekage recognized it as a wind jutsu, though he wasn't able to tell which. The daimyo's guards weren't that good. One of them shouted a warning when the attack was almost upon him and tried to put up some shield, but he was too slow. The blades of the technique cut him in half. The jutsu continued in its path and hit one of the men carrying the daimyo. The guard cried in pain and dropped his charge. The fat nobleman fell on the ground and started rolling away from his entourage. Some of his bodyguards were so focused on outside threats that it took them a couple of seconds before they noticed it. By that time the rotund man had rolled a good distance away. There was another almost imperceptible wave in the air, for those well-versed in ninja arts identifiable as a wind blade. It was heading straight for the downed daimyo. The guards running for him would be too slow to save him. The Hokage stood in perfect position to stop it, but he was a Suna ninja and Suna ninja work only for those who pay them. The daimyo wasn't paying them, his budget cuts nearly ruining the hidden sand village. He watched motionlessly as the blade cut into the nobleman's fat chest. It went deep. Wind blades always did. The guards finally reached their master and noticed his injury. One of them cried in alarm, another frantically tried to stop the bleeding. They wouldn't make it. The Hokage could tell from his vast experience that the wound was fatal. That's what you get for budget cuts, he thought darkly. Maybe something good would come out of this debacle after all. Elsewhere in the room Yugugo knew she was supposed to protect the Hokage, but the third looked like he had no trouble watching his own back. Her cousin was a different matter. Hotaru was sitting on the ground, blood slowly forming a puddle around her, shoulders sagging with exhaustion and the Iwa genin approaching her with malignant intent. Making a decision took her only a moment. She left her leader at the care of his other guards and rushed to assist Hotaru. She knew she would probably get into trouble for it later, but she didn't care. It took her less than a second to cross the distance between them. Her hands flew through a series of seals while she was running. She breathed a small fireball and the insects were incinerated. Hotaru looked up in surprise. Yugugo smiled encouragingly, but it was lost behind her mask. "Come, I'll get you out," she shouted. "What about Naruto?" Hotaru pointed towards her teammate. Naruto had finally gotten to his feet, but so did Kuratsuchi. And what was worse, her brother now stood beside her. Akatsuchi was badly cut and dripping blood, but he didn't seem bothered by it a bit. His gray eyes were set on his target. Naruto gulped worriedly under their gaze. "Brother," Kuratsuchi exclaimed. She couldn't tell herself whether she felt more relieved or worried. Her brother was back on his feet, but there was something distinctively wrong with him. She just couldn't name it. She didn't have time to ponder about it. Akatsuchi sprang to action and so did she. Naruto saw both the rock siblings performing hand seals. He couldn't detect any effect, but his instincts made him jump from his spot anyway. Still nothing seemed to happen, well, not counting the fighting going on around. Did their technique fail or am I trapped in a genjutsu? "Kai," he said bringing his hands together. Sure enough, a fissure appeared in the floor exactly where he had been standing a moment before. And Akatsuchi wasn't where he used to be as well. Naruto barely avoided his earth-shattering punch. He jumped right into the path of Kuratsuchi's kick. He was flung backwards. An Anbu with long purple hair reminiscent of Hotaru appeared and buried her ninjato in Akatsuchi. The Iwa genin barely grunted and tried to shatter her skull. The Anbu woman jumped back at the last possible moment, saving her neck but losing her sword. It was official now. There was something seriously wrong with Akatsuchi. He wasn't the only one who noticed it. Kuratsuchi saw it as well and gaped at her brother, or whatever it was, open-mouthed. The moment of hesitation almost cost her dearly. Naruto shook off the shock first and leapt at her with a kunai, but she noticed him in time to escape with only a scratch. Then Akatsuchi attacked him again. Naruto wasn't able to fully avoid it, but he managed to latch himself on the big genin's arm. He kicked the big boy in the thigh. Akatsuchi didn't even grunt, which was strange, because he had channeled wind chakra to his toes. Naruto didn't think about it and grabbed the handle of Yugugo's katana. Akatsuchi punched him, but Naruto didn't let go. He flew back, but he now had a sword. Yugugo saw that the IWA ninja had now his flank open. She used the opportunity to send a small, but hot fireball at him. She hit him point blank. Akatsuchi's clothes and hair caught on fire, but that was about it. Akatsuchi! Kuratsuchi shouted in alarm. She had no idea what was going on here, but she was liking it less and less. Naruto's eyes widened when he saw the burning genin approaching him. But he didn't back off. He was finally armed and he felt confident. It was almost instinct to charge the blade with wind chakra now. He waited for the right moment and sprang forth. He slid under Akatsuchi's fist and struck at his chest. The legs continued to run ahead, but the torso fell off. The arms were still trying to grab at Naruto. Kuratsuchi screamed. The thing on the ground was split in half, yet both parts were still moving, relentlessly trying to attack the target, despite one of them being still on fire. She was certain now. Whatever it wasn't her brother. She turned on her heels and ran. Yugugo had encountered loads of strange things during her ANBU carrier, but nothing compared to this. A mortally wounded body was moving like it didn't even feel its injuries. It scared her. And what was worse, she didn't even have her sword and she felt naked and vulnerable without it. What's that? The whispered question turned her attention to the ground. Her cousin was sitting there, wounds still bleeding freely. I don't know, but let's not stay around to find out, she decided. Hataru nodded. Yugugo picked her up and headed for the exit. Naruto ran after them. They made barely 5 steps before the air was filled with sinister oppressive chakra. The banquet Rushi had been watching the battle with mild interest. As a shinobi of IWA, he was supposed to protect the Tsuchikage, but he didn't feel like it. Oanoki was fully capable of defending himself, and if he wasn't, well, he never liked the old bugger anyway. If something happened to the esteemed midget, he could claim that he had orders to do nothing until his Kage expressly told him otherwise. And it didn't occur yet. So he stood in the background, occasionally dodging a stray projectile and waited for something to happen. He got his hopes up when the Hokage joined the fray, but old Oanoki dodged. No luck there. And then the Tsuchikage gave him that signal. Not just any signal, but that one. Rushi cursed inwardly. Why did it have to be now? He had hoped he wouldn't have to do this ever again. Old Oanoki knew how much he hated it and yet he forced him into it again and again, thankfully not so often after the war had ended. But considering the mess going on around, things were likely to change soon. He swore again. He had already fought one war for IWA and he didn't want to get caught in another, but there was nothing he could do about it. The thought of running had crossed his mind more than once, but he always discarded it. Life in IWA wasn't that bad in peacetime and he felt he was too old for the life on the run. But now things were about to change. Shouldn't he reconsider? Maybe, but he should do it once he had the time to think it over carefully. This wasn't a good time to go nuke Nin. He was still a shinobi of IWA and he had an order to follow. With practiced ease, he entered his mindscape and reached where the Yonbi dwelt. The giant ape sat in the middle of a humongous cavern, chained to a massive ring in the floor by a long chain. So you come again, human, it drawled. What do you want now? And why do I even ask? It's not like I couldn't tell even if I didn't know what you were thinking. It's always the same all the time. Since you know what I came here for, would you grant my request? Rushi went straight to the point. And why should I? The giant Satori shrugged. And don't tell me because that Tsuchikage of yours told you so. That's not a reason enough for me. Then what about, the old man began. Measuring my strength against others? The demon finished for him. Not good enough. In case you missed it, which I know you didn't, it's the Kyubi no Kitsune out there. So would you help or not? Roshi was struggling to keep his voice calm. He did it despite knowing it didn't matter when dealing with the Yonbi. And why should I? The giant ape shrugged. You don't want to do it anyway. Roshi sighed. It was just too hard to keep even his thoughts in check. It's hard to keep your thoughts in check, isn't it? Roshi would swear the Yonbi was doing it purposefully to piss him off. Do you have any idea what bother is listening to them? The old Iwa Nin forcibly calmed his mind. He could once do it in the blink of an eye, but lately he got out of practice. Fortunately he could still do it. No need to get so nasty, the monster monkey growled. He couldn't stand when the cavern around him got quiet. It could nearly drive him insane if it went on for too long. I'll help you, but be quick about it. Thank you. Roshi smiled. He opened his eyes. He was back in the main hall of the Kazekage Manor. Less than a second had passed there. It was good he could come to an understanding with his tenant so quickly. In the end, it was only a matter of knowing what the demon hated the most. But now came the hard part. With the Satora's power flowing through his veins, he was assaulted by the thoughts of the people around him. He was nearly overwhelmed with the sense of panic and bloodlust coming from civilians and ninja respectively. He pushed it to the back of his mind. He concentrated on his mission, eliminating the target. With Naruto's group, Naruto paused in his tracks. Another demon here? He knew the feeling didn't come from Gaara. But who? He didn't have to search for long. He spotted a tall man with a red ponytail, strange faceplate and Iwa Hitai beelining for him. Sinister reddish chakra was outlining his silhouette. Of all the times for the Kyubi to go on strike. Before he could finish the thought, he felt heat seeping from underneath. He jumped sideways before the ground under his feet could completely melt into lava. He barely landed when the Iwa Jinchuriki spat a stream of the superheated earth from his mouth. He managed to dodge it by a hair's breadth. The injured leg was acting up again. He wasn't used to being wounded. He was missing Kyubi's healing sorely. He considered giving into the Kitsune's demands. But was it wise? Everything inside him was crying against pleading to the demon for anything so soon after challenging him to the game of chicken. If only Tenzo was there, but he couldn't see the Jounin anywhere. He wished he had talked with his guardian about the fox. Why was he even so bothered about the presence of the Anbu anyway? If he just had some advice about dealing with the Nine Tails. Another blast of lava cut his musings short. Once again he barely managed to evade. He tried to counterattack with a slicing scream, but it didn't cut through the protective cloak of demonic chakra. And the red-haired ninja attacked again, melting the ground under his feet. This time his souls were signed before he got away. He heard a scream behind him. He shot a glance over his shoulder. The Anbu woman carrying Hataru stumbled. He didn't see what had hit her, but it sent her to her knees gasping in pain. Hataru rolled out of her arms, ending dangerously close to the molten ground. Naruto couldn't wait any longer. His teammate was in peril. He had to save her no matter what. Banquet battle. The feeling of demonic chakra in the air made Tenzo stop in his tracks. It nearly got him killed. The Iwa Jounin he was fighting tried to whack off his head. The wood user blocked at the last moment and counterattacked. He tried to disengage, but his opponent didn't let him. He cursed. He had no time for this. He had to look for the source of the aura. He could tell it was neither Naruto nor Gaara. But who else? Somebody powerful, that was beyond doubt. His limited abilities wouldn't be enough to deal with it. That is if he lived long enough to use them. He sighed and concentrated on dodging and parrying. Naruto's mindscape. The Kyubi was sitting in his cage. Even imprisoned, he could smell the Yuki in the air clearly. It wasn't only the weakling of a tanuki, but the four-tailed ape as well. While both of them put together were no match for him under normal circumstances, his current predicament was far from favorable. He was stuck inside a puny little brat, his power bound with seals he couldn't break, at least for now, and the miserable little whelp refused to cooperate with him. Oh, why did his host have to be so difficult? If he just allowed a small part of his chakra through the seal, they could wipe the overgrown Satori from the face of the earth. But no, the kid had to close off the flow altogether. Oh wait, the demon realized, it was me who stopped it. Oh, why did the little annoyance have to call me bluff? The truth was that the kitsune was scared. Every time since his sealing there was at least a small trickle of his power flowing through his vessel. It wasn't much, but he could manipulate things a bit, if they got out of hand. Sure, he couldn't do more than lend his chakra to the stupid hairless monkey and whisper his suggestions, but even that was better than nothing. He still hated his predicament and everybody who got him into it, but he could deal, though barely. Now even that was taken from him, and due to a stupid game of chicken, of all things. Damn it, I'm no chicken, he roared, but there was nobody who could hear him. Which was good, since they couldn't doubt his mental health this way. He refused to lose the game. The great and mighty Kyubi lost to no one. Well, that wasn't entirely true, but he refused to let it get to him. It was only a temporary setback, he would get out of here in no time, or he told himself so. He felt a stream of demonic power-enhanced lava flowing dangerously close to his prison. He had to grudgingly admit that the Yonbi was no pushover, even if he couldn't compare to him. He would have already supplied his power to the brat, if it didn't mean being called chicken. Arg, why do I even care about such childish games anyway? He could feel Naruto's resolve falter. What had brought it on? Ah, there, a teammate in danger. The Kyubi smiled. The boy was just too caring. He wouldn't be able to resist and would come to him, begging for his power, any time now. He had to wait just a little longer, but drat it, every second felt like a century. And the kitsune remembered some centuries that felt particularly long. It was grating on his nerves. What if they got hit head-on before the idiot could make up his mind? It nearly sent him into a panicky fit. Just a moment, patience, you can do it, ... He repeated an endless mantra in his head, but it did little to help, patience never being his strong suit. I have to wait just a moment longer, he reminded himself. Then suddenly waiting wasn't an option anymore. Kazekage's manner Gaara felt the yuki in the air. Kill, Shikaku whispered in his mind. The redhead shot a glance over his shoulder. His sister was safely out of the room now. He had no more obligations here. He could do whatever he wanted. But what did he want? Kill them all. There was no doubt what the one-tail wanted. It was nothing new for Gaara. But was it what he wanted to do? Not so long ago, he would have answered yes without thinking. Then he had met Naruto and lost their fight. He realized there was more to life than mindless slaughter. He hadn't killed anybody since. But now there was fighting going on everywhere. He knew they were the injured party here and that they had full right to kill the attackers. But what would that do to him? Would the bloodlust get to him? Would he reverse back to how he used to be? He didn't want it. Not now, when his life seemed to take a turn for the better. Sand swirled impatiently around his feet, eagerly waiting for his command. The demonic energy spiked higher. Kill them already. I want blood. I'm hungry. Shikaku was getting louder and louder. His voice mingled with the screams of people. Gaara couldn't hold it back anymore. Yes, he whispered. Sand surged forward. With Naruto had never tried to access the Kyubi's prison on purpose before, so he wasn't sure how to go about it. How does one enter his mindscape anyway? He supposed meditation was a way, but he didn't think he would have enough time to sit down and clear his mind. He barely had the time to get out of the path of another lava attack. Yep, meditation was definitely out. What else was in? Try as he might, his mind came up with a blank. Not good. I wish I could just think about it and appear there, but it isn't that easy. Wait, how do I know it won't work? It's not like I have a better plan, do I? Let's give it a try. He started thinking about the cave, the huge metal bars and the beast contained behind them. He tried hard to visualize them, so hard that he forgot about the real world around him. The moment of inattention cost him dearly. There was a hot, searing pain in his body. It was so strong he wasn't able to tell where he was hit. The pain overwhelmed everything. The world went out of focus and dissolved into darkness. An all too familiar kind of darkness. Naruto's mindscape. I waited too long, the Kyuubi realized. Now his host was severely wounded, and if he withheld his power much longer, they would both die. His knowledge of the human anatomy was good enough to tell. He stood up to push his chakra through the bars. Then he paused. He had a visitor. Maybe he could wait before helping, though only for a couple of seconds. But it might be long enough to get something out of it. He settled down and pretended to be asleep. The moment he appeared in the dark sewer, Naruto began doubting the wisdom of his decision. Once he could see the red tint and feel the putrid taint of the Kyuubi's chakra, he was struck with fear. Did he really want to touch something so dangerous? There was that thing with being wounded, probably fatally, but he still wasn't convinced. Then the image of Hotaru lying helpless on the ground flashed to his mind. There was no way he would leave his teammate to her fate, not when he had the power to help her. He only had to ask for it. He strode forward in a determined gait. The walk to the cage seemed endless to him, though he realized it was actually quite short. He paused when the gigantic bars came into view. The fox was there, curled onto himself, his snout covered by one of his tails, apparently sleeping. Once again, the boy was struck with doubt. Was it really right to give in to the beast's demands? It was true that he sorely needed the power and that he needed it now, but wouldn't using it let the monster loose? Wouldn't it make the gigantic bars of the cage break? Or was he perhaps too pessimistic? He should have faith in the Yondame's work. Yet it was so easy to imagine the metal poles snapping, the fox pouncing forward. He shook his head forcefully. He had no time for idle musings. Hotaru was in danger, he was gravely wounded, he had to act now. "Hey, you," he shouted. The kitsune gave no outward reaction, but somehow it seemed to be listening. Was it actually awake and playing difficult? He didn't know, but he wouldn't put it past the demon. "Wake up, fuzzball. I'm talking to you." There was no way the Ninetales could let the insult slide. And he didn't. "Who are you calling fuzzball, you miserable hairless monkey?" The Kyuubi roared, springing to his feet. He presented a really magnificent sight, teeth barred, fur standing on its ends, tails swinging wildly. The only thing disrupting the effect was the cage. Naruto stood his ground. "So you are awake," he gloated. "So I am." The demon deflated a bit. "Did you come to accept my offer?" Now, there was it. The point of decision. He could either accept or decline, but whatever he chose, there would be no coming back. He was reminded of the graveness of his situation. He felt intimidated. What should he do now? It seemed like the question had no correct answer. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He came here for a reason. He had already decided. Then why was he hesitating now? Maybe because dealing with the devil was so much harder when he could see him in all his might? "So what is it?" the beast asked with a hint of irritation in his voice. Naruto didn't fail to notice it. "Why so impatient?" he asked. "I don't have all day for you." "Really?" Naruto raised an eyebrow. "What is here to do besides sleeping?" None of your business. Naruto went on guard. The Kyuubi was behaving strangely. But what could be the reason? He took a look around. The cave looked just like it always did, dark, huge and ominous. The corridors leading out were the same as always as well. So what could it be? And then he noticed it. Why is there so little water? The surface was barely a half of its usual height. What does it matter? I think it does matter. He was convinced he hit the nail on the head. I don't care what you think, his tenant growled, irritated. So do you accept or not? Naruto allowed himself a small smile. If he wasn't mistaken, the Kyuubi desperately wanted to help, but didn't want to admit defeat. Though, when he thought about the possible reason, his optimism disappeared. But he refused to let it show. So this is it, he laughed. What? Our game of chicken, he explained. This is where it ends. I'm mortally wounded, am I not? So do you want to die with me? Watch it, you impudent whelp, the demon roared. Do you want to let your teammate die? Oh. He had completely forgotten about that. Hotaru was in danger and the stupid fox was playing his stupid mind games. His anger rose. Now listen, you flea-infested scurvy pelt. You give me your power now or I take it. Try it, you mortal scum, the greatest of Bijou snarled. I will, Naruto promised. He strode towards the cage. The Kyuubi tensed. If the stupid child reached into his cage, he would have an once-in-a-lifetime chance to get out of here. He prepared to pounce. Naruto reached the cage and touched one of the bars. It was cold. So cold he had to retract his hand immediately or risk frostbite. He didn't pause. He reached between the bars and grabbed a handful of the red substance flowing behind them. Kyuubi jumped. There was no way the kid could remove his hand from his cage in time. He had no idea what happened next. It seemed like the bars themselves moved. All he knew for sure was that one of them struck his muzzle painfully. His teeth missed the human's wrist, only glancing his hand instead. Naruto jumped back, holding a portion of his chakra in his hand. He ignored the blood flowing from the shallow gash, mixing with the red cloud enveloping his fist, and held his arm out triumphantly. I've got it. The demon roared in rage. The bit of chakra Naruto managed to snatch was connected to the rest with a thin thread. Naruto pulled on it, dragging more of his power to him. The Kyuubi pulled back, trying to prevent him. But then he noticed the water outside the cage being even lower than before. There was no more time. So have my power, whelp, but only for today. The red Yuki flowed freely through the bars. Thanks, shouted Naruto before disappearing from the cave. Somehow the Kyuubi thought he might have heard him saying, chicken, but that might have been just his imagination. He settled down and brooded. His jailer might have won this battle, but he didn't win the war. Not by far. The banquet battle. For a moment, Roshi had thought things were going well. Thanks to the powers the Yonbi no Satori granted him, he was able to tell that the Konoha Jinchuriki was trying to draw on his tenant's powers, but wasn't sure how to do it. So he was untrained. Perfect. It made him more confident about facing the vessel of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. He knew he would be toast if the child somehow managed to unleash the full power of his demon. He had to prevent it at any cost. He could see that the blonde genin was distracted. All the better for him. If he could hit him now, he could end the battle and the threat to IWA in one swipe. It would require speed and precision. He formed a spear of lava. Only his demonic chakra prevented him from getting burned as he held it. He took aim and threw. And for a moment it looked like he'd hit the bullseye, but then the projectile was deflected slightly. The target was still hit, but it wasn't instantly fatal anymore. What was that? Where did all the sand come from? He had no time to ponder over it any longer. Yuki spiked high in the room. The Kyuubi's power had been unleashed. It didn't take a genius to figure out that things weren't good anymore. Elsewhere in the ballroom, Hana was torn. Somewhere in the room were her teammates, undoubtedly in danger. A part of her wanted to run to them, assist them in any way, but her body was still weak from the poison and 2 of her dogs were limping badly. She wouldn't be much of a help and she didn't want to be a hindrance. On the other hand, here was her baby brother. Kiba was shaking badly, clutching their mother's leg. He was still a child who had never been in a real fight. And now he found himself in the middle of this. Hana had been in battles before, but even she was scared by the sheer power and intensity of the killing intent permeating through the room. Even the Inuzuka clan head looked disturbed. Then the power in the air spiked even higher. "We have to get out of here," some shouted. "No kidding," Hana replied, "but how?" Doors blocked. The crowd of the terrified dignitaries was still trying to push through. "Then we make one," the Inuzuka matriarch decided. "How?" "Come on, Kuramaru." The dog barked in affirmation. It was a sign of his high distress. He generally preferred speaking. Some gently pried Kiba's arms from her. "Watch him." She tossed the protesting child to Hana. The young kunoichi held him tight. Her little brother was shaking so hard she almost dropped him. Inuzuka style, so too Ro. Chakra enveloped both Tsum and Kuramaru, and when it dissipated, a giant 2-headed wolf stood there. Even though Hana had seen Tsum so too Ro before, she once again marveled at how big it was. She couldn't come close to performing the technique so well, but Tsum was the clan head for a reason. Kiba, who had never seen it before, was staring speechless. At least he stopped shaking. Garuga. The double-headed wolf growled and sprung forward, spinning at blinding speed. Hana wondered how long she would have to train before attaining such mastery. Then the furry tornado slammed into the wall. The Kazakage's manor was built to withstand battles, but its architect counted on the attacks coming from the outside. Tsum's attack cut deep and cracked the wall, but it wasn't enough to break through. Tsum lay in the rubble, separated from Kuramaru. She slowly pushed herself up. "Not enough?" She scowled. "Let's do it again." "Allow me to help," a sweet female voice sounded close. The Inuzuka family turned around. There stood a woman in a geisha's ornate kimono, accompanied by 3 familiar genin. Hana immediately recognized them as one of the finalist teams. The geisha lookalike moved her fingers and 3 puppets made in the shape of beautiful girls moved forward. "My 3 fair maidens can clear the rubble fast." It was true. The puppets moved fast, guided by the strings of an expert puppeteer, their sharp fingers removing the pieces of concrete faster than the Inuzuka trio could have managed. "Here, all done now," Tiono announced. "Right," Tsum grinned. "Let's hit it again." "Wait a minute," a new voice interrupted. "Yuku," Tiono greeted. "Fancy seeing you here." Tsum looked at the second Suna finalist Team Sensei dubiously. It might have been due to his team, including the Kaneko boy and his cat, limping behind him. "You can't break through the outer wall," the tiger-like Jounin warned. "There are seals against damage." "They're against outside damage," the geisha corrected. "I wouldn't bet on it," Yuka replied. "Just let the dogs break their noses," Akira suggested. Some growled at him. The rivalry between their clans went far back, their families regularly accusing each other of stealing and copying their jutsu. Snapping at each other was a reflex. "Is meowing all you can do, scaredy cat?" The jab was supported by Kuratsum's pitiful whining. The panther was trying to hide behind his master's legs, obviously regretted who he had bitten. "Cut it out," Miju chided. "We're in trouble enough." She was right. A blast of lava landed dangerously close to them. Miju's right, Toshiro added. We have to concentrate on getting out of here. It was nearly a miracle that all the genin were still alive after being in the middle of such a battle, but they all had the common sense to run as soon as it broke out, lingering only to pick up their wounded teammates, and nobody actively pursued them. They were also lucky enough not to run into the path of a stray technique. So how do we do it? Tiono asked. Everybody was reluctant to try just how did the supposed seals on the outside wall work. I'll do another Garuga, if you are so scared, some offered. Wait, Yuku halted her. I'll blast it off with a fire dragon. In an enclosed space? Tiono's eyes widened. Has your blazing spirit burned out your brain? The other Suna-jounin had the good grace to look sheepish. Come again, Kuramaru, some commanded when nobody seemed about to do anything. We're going to blast right through. I'm not sure it's a good idea, the dog grumbled but obeyed. Soon the Sotu-ro stood there again. Garuga. The flurry tornado surged forward, aiming right at the damaged spot in the wall. She impacted at full speed. There was a loud crash and a flash of light. A section of the wall went down. Obviously the protection seals weren't as good as was rumored. Mom! Hana yelled. Some lay in the rubble, Kuramaru beside her, both of them unmoving. Hana rushed forward, almost dropping Kiba in the process. She's alive, Tiono said, appearing beside the distraught young Kunoichi, her 3 puppets already clearing the way. Hana was eternally grateful for it. And now hurry, the Suna-jounin continued, we have to get out. The battle is picking up. She was right. The sheer amount of killing intent in the air intensified by the minute. Hana would be shaking in her shoes if she wasn't too distracted by her concern for her family. Yes, she nodded. She tried to pick her mother up, but found that she couldn't. Kiba was still hanging on her for dear life. Would someone help me? She looked around the assembly. Her eyes landed on Team Yuku. All its members were walking on their own 2 feet and weren't carrying anybody. I'll help, Toshiro offered. With his figure he had no trouble gathering the grown woman in his arms. Miju started for Kuramaru, but he was too heavy for her. She shot a questioning glance towards her remaining teammate. Helping an Inuzuka dog? Akira shook his head. My parents would have kittens, he said, but helped to move the giant canine anyway. Soon the whole group was safely out. Thanks, Hana said with a smile. You're welcome, Catboy replied. Just don't tell about it to anybody. I wouldn't survive the shame. I won't, she promised. She wouldn't survive the shame either. Cut it, lovebirds, Tiono shouted. We aren't in the clear yet. Lovebirds? Hana looked ready to tear the geisha look-alike with her bare hands. But she had to admit the puppet mistress was right. They were still in danger. She shot a rueful glance to the manor. Her teammates were still inside. She could do nothing for them. She had to take care of her family first. She had to trust them to handle themselves. Please, let them be all right, she prayed. Then she picked her fear-frozen brother and followed the Suna teams. Kazekage's manor. Naruto opened his eyes. He felt the intoxicating power flowing through his body again. Until now, he hadn't realized how much he had missed it. But now it was back and everything finally seemed all right. Even the hole in his torso didn't bother him anymore, the enhanced healing taking care of it almost as soon as he picked himself off the ground. Everything around him was clear and sharp. He felt stronger than ever before. The power was flowing through his body, filling his every cell, threatening to overflow. It wanted to be used and he wanted to use it. He focused his sights on the person in front of him. Roshi was standing there, his body surrounded by the Yonbi's chakra, his fingers flying through hand seals. Naruto had no intention to let him finish them. He sprang forward with speed far exceeding anything he had been capable of before. Roshi saw his charge and finished the last seal with utmost haste. A wall of lava rose from the ground in front of him. Naruto had to jump high to avoid colliding with it. It brought him right into the path of a large chakra hand. He roared in anger and swiped at it with his own chakra claws, but didn't inflict any damage. The giant monkey's fist slammed into him and sent him flying. Roshi let out the breath he didn't know he was holding. That had been close. Only one tail of the Kyuubi's power was unleashed and he had so much trouble defending against it. He barely noticed the sand swirling around, trying to envelope him. The Yonbi's chakra protected him from the attack. Naruto nimbly landed on his feet. How dare the stupid monkey punch him? Him? He snarled. He was going to show that Fleabag once and for all. He jumped forward, intent on tearing the ape apart. Roshi didn't wait for him. He jumped out of his way and sent forward another splash of lava. Naruto had to try hard to evade it. I'm going to kill him for this, he thought. I'm not going to manage if I go about it this way, a more realistic part of his mind supplied. Crap, he realized, I'm being influenced by Kyuubi. I have to calm down. That was easier said than done. The malevolent chakra coursing through him was threatening to drown him in the rage. He took a deep breath. I have to calm down. Try it, the Kyuubi grinned darkly. Naruto cursed him silently. No, he realized. I mustn't listen to him. I must concentrate, think. The rage was still there, but it seemed to lose its edge. Instead of the blinding, unthinking fury, he was now filled with seething, cold hate. His mind started supplying him with creative ways of disposing of Roshi. The ground under his feet melted into lava and he managed to jump away at the last moment. Think calmly, he chastised himself. Reaching Roshi directly proved quite difficult. Maybe he should try a distance attack. He ran through the seals for a fireball. Then he realized there were still civilians in the room. Don't care about them, the demon suggested, but even at the peak of his rage, Naruto couldn't. But it was now too late to abort the technique. He had to spit it out or burn himself. He aimed high, hoping to avoid making unnecessary collateral damage. He grossly underestimated the sheer effectivity of Kyuubi-powered Katan technique. The flame spread along the ceiling, melting parts of it in the process. Naruto cut the jutsu as soon as he could. What's the matter? The kitsune taunted. Are you afraid of some little fire? Shut up, he thought back. He didn't hear an answer, but he thought the beast grinned. He began regretting contacting it at all. But he needed its power to defend Hotaru. And speaking of which, where was she? Elsewhere in the ballroom Yugugo pulled the kunai from her thigh. It hurt a lot, but the blade missed the vein and that was all that was important. She had survived worse. She pushed herself to her feet, suppressing a groan of pain. She limped to where her cousin was crawling away from the molten patch on the floor. She shot a glance over her shoulder. Behind her 3 Jinchuriki were battling each other, demonic power surging through the air. She knew she was no match for any of them and their best hope of survival was getting out of here as fast as they could. Fortunately nobody seemed interested in deterring them, everybody too intent on escaping what was slowly but surely turning into a disaster zone. She reached her cousin's side. She helped her to her feet. They were both unsteady, but they could walk. Now if only they had somewhere to go. The crowds blocking the doors didn't seem to diminish at all. Then there was an explosion and she noticed a part of the wall collapsing. There was their ticket out. They made their way there as fast as they could. It wouldn't do to have even this exit swarmed by panicking people before they could get there. They got halfway there when the ceiling was lit by a superheated fire technique. It was far enough from them, but the heat was nearly unbearable anyway. They were brought to their knees. Droplets of molten glass rained down. Gotta get out fast, Hataru rasped. Yugugo agreed wholeheartedly. They scrambled to their feet again. All around them people were screaming, some of them running around with their clothes on fire. Hataru felt ready to throw up. Yugugo noticed her discomfort. "Hold it, girl," she advised. "You can puke all you want once we're out." Hataru nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Instead she looked at the hole in the wall. It seemed both so close and too far. She concentrated on getting there. They both did. Banquet Battle Kuratsuchi was on the verge of panic. Ever since she had run screaming from the thing that was pretending to be her brother, she felt lost. She fancied herself a tough kunoichi, but the things occurring in the hall by far exceeded everything she was prepared for. She needed someone to lean on, somebody to tell her what to do. Her first instinct was her grandfather, but she saw him fighting both the Hokage and Kazekage and several other probably high-ranked ninja, and she realized she couldn't get to him alive. She noticed Kajiramaru running around, but the Kamizuru was just as scared as she was. Then she heard an explosion loud enough to be noticed even in the racket. Takashi-sensei. She turned to see where did it come from. She found him easily, his reddish-blonde ponytail shining like a beacon to her. He was fighting several Suna shinobi at once and was doing well in keeping them at safe distance. She headed over to him. She had little trouble weaving through the rapidly thinning crowd. Nobody bothered to attack her. They probably didn't consider a mere genin dangerous enough. It occurred to her that she should be insulted, but she felt grateful instead. In her current situation, there was no room for pride. She got close to the group fighting her sensei. She noticed one kunoichi trying to sneak upon him from behind. Her hands flashed through seals, casting a simple genjutsu on her enemy. Before the woman could break it, Kuratsuchi jumped at her back and sliced her throat with a kunai. One Suna ninja noticed what happened and attacked her with his short sword. She barely blocked his blade with her kunai. Then there was another explosion and the Suna ninja fell on the ground in a shower of blood. "Kuratsuchi!" Takashi-sensei shouted. "What are you doing here? Where are the others?" Takashi-sensei. "Akatsuchi." Her voice caught in her throat. She couldn't speak about what she had witnessed. Takashi didn't pry. He saw her expression and came to his own conclusion about his student's fate. "And Kajiramaru?" he inquired, throwing a ball of explosive clay on another opponent. The man managed to dodge, but the force of the explosion threw him off balance. Takashi jumped in to finish him, but another Suna ninja intervened, forcing him to retreat. Somewhere around, Kuratsuchi answered, throwing two shuriken at an approaching shinobi. Then she spotted her teammate. "Hey, Kajiramaru, over here," she called. The boy started to make his way over to them. Kuratsuchi absent-mindedly blocked an attack. "What are we going to do?" "What, indeed?" That was what Takashi himself wanted to know. "Just stick close," he replied, "we'll get through this." It was exactly what Kuratsuchi wanted to hear. Yet somehow it did little to ease her worries. The battle Gara felt alive. He had thought he had gotten over his bloodlust, but apparently not. Now with the Shikaku's power flowing through his veins and a battle raging around, the thrill was slowly consuming him again. Mother was laughing in glee and sand was dancing wildly around his body. He had fed the first person to cross his path to her. He knew neither who that person was nor where was he from. He realized he didn't care. That was nothing new for him, but lately he was learning to live otherwise. Idly he wondered whether he was turning into what he used to be before. And what would Naruto think of him now? His eyes strayed to where his friend was. The small blonde was enveloped in red chakra, attacking the Iwa Jinchuriki furiously. Gara remembered what he had told him about his demon. Wily and hard to control, if he remembered it right. Naruto must consider this important to use it. And if it was important to his friend, it was important to him as well. He had to help. He drew on a small portion of Shikaku's power and called forth more sand. Kakashi was scared, and it had nothing to do with the fact he was currently fighting the Tsuchikage and a couple of his guards and not faring too well. It had more to do with the demonic aura in the air. He was no coward, but ever since the fateful day every bit of demonic chakra scared him out of his mind. Call it a phobia if you want, Kakashi preferred calling it common sense. This time it wasn't nearly as strong as when the Kyuubi had attacked 9 years ago, but somehow it felt even worse. Maybe it was because there were 3 demons here. The sight was really terrifying. Naruto was enveloped in a red shroud resembling a fox with enormously long ears, one tail swinging behind him. The IWA ninja stood tall and proud, and shrouded in maroon chakra in the shape of a monkey with 2 tails flailing around. Close to them was the Suna boy, sand gathering around his body, forming parts of an animal Kakashi couldn't recognize. Sand was flowing into the room through every door and window, obeying the call of its master. It was forming into giant tendrils, ready to strike at command. Kakashi didn't even want to think about what would happen if one of them struck him. He doubted he knew a defense strong enough to stop it. Once more his memories took him back to his sensei's last battle. Thinking back to it, he couldn't understand where Minato-sensei had found the courage necessary to stand against the Kyuubi in all its might. Just feeling a small portion of its killing intent was enough to make his knees shake. He supposed that the Yondaime was just that awesome. But so many people fought that day, he remembered. Where did they find their courage? He pondered over it for a moment. Konoha was attacked, he realized. There was nowhere to run. We were, fighting for our homes and families. Now Konoha was far away. Is it still worth fighting for? Wouldn't it be better to run than be crushed by a power we cannot resist? What is here to fight for? Then he realized it was his sensei's son fighting there. Could he simply abandon him? He had a duty here. He remembered his earlier words about the genin being bound to die soon. Did he really believe it, or was he afraid to get close to somebody who might be gone before he knew it? Or was he simply too scared of losing anybody that he isolated himself completely? He didn't know. And he didn't know why he was meditating over it now. The last dust cube had nearly crushed him. He retorted with a lightning jutsu. He had to compose himself before he'd get killed here. And perhaps he should stop running from his past as well. Near the dais the Tsuchikage surveyed the situation. It wasn't favorable for them. Roshi was holding his ground against the 2 Jinchuriki, but on the other fronts the fight wasn't going so well. The Suna ninja along with the few from Konoha had overcome their initial confusion and were now utilizing their greater numbers. The IWA guards were losing and dying. He absent-mindedly jumped from his spot, the ground he stood on a moment before turning into a mud river, courtesy of the Hokage. He raised a stone wall to stop a winged bird from the Kazekage. That reminded him that even his own situation wasn't rosy. He was fighting 2 Kage here, and even when they were holding back due to the civilians still present within the room, he was having trouble. It was made even worse by his own hips, which picked that particular time to start hurting. Oanoki cursed them and valiantly ignored the feeling of 2 kunai embedded in his sides. Even if his pride tried to protest, his decades of battle experience told him it was time to call a tactical retreat. He took a moment to survey the locations of all his surviving shinobi. There weren't many, but it wasn't hopeless yet. He turned a direction none of his subordinates was standing and created a dust cube far bigger than anything he had used in this fight. He winced as he realized how much chakra it cost him. He let it fly. It nearly hit the Kazekage, but the man dodged swiftly. Pity. Oanoki had hoped he would try to block. The cube moved forward, crushing several slow Suna ninja and one injured civilian in the process until it slammed into the wall. There was a brief flash of light and then the wall and adjacent part of the ceiling came crashing down. A cloud of dust shrouded the vision of everybody in the room. Then a strange sound was heard. The younger shinobi present were startled. Some of the older recognized it. It was a signal. Whatever IWA ninja were still alive moved to act. The ballroom Kuratsuchi would have never believed that she would be one day overjoyed to hear a signal to retreat. But now she was. She wanted nothing more than to get out of here. Formation 4, Takeshi-sensei commanded. She exchanged a quick glance with Kajiramaru, who had joined them recently, and assumed her position on Takeshi's left flank just as her teammate stood on his right. Sensei threw a few of his explosive clay balls to clear them a path. He was running low on them, but this situation warranted their use. As soon as the blasts cleared them a path, they ran forward. They noticed the still surviving Suna shinobi doing the same. Soon they were all gathered near the hole that Tsuchikage had made. Only Rushi stayed behind. "Get going," Oanoki commanded. "We have to get out of Suna yet." They took off running, the Tsuchikage stopping to throw a dust dragon to deter any pursuers. Kazakage's manner Rushi cursed inwardly. They left him behind. That's a good reason to leave them, isn't it? Yanbi no Satori offered his opinion. Nobody asked you, he sent back. You didn't have to, the overgrown monkey smirked. I know what you think, remember. How could I ever forget? Rushi mentally rolled his eyes. You'd never let me. Too right. But this isn't a good time to defect. In case you didn't notice, we're in the middle of a battle in the heart of an enemy territory and the sand is about to bury us alive. So what? The four-tailed ape shrugged. I'm with you. So we should stick to them if we want to survive, the red-headed man explained. You're a pessimist, the Satori huffed. I prefer a realist, Rushi corrected. And now we should really work on getting out of here. If you insist, the demon sighed. Do you need more power? Maybe a little. Rushi felt the power of the bijou surging through his veins. He swung his chakra tails around, knocking away the attacking wave of sand. A scream of rage reached his ears, but he paid it no attention. He had to act quickly. The Kyubi Jinchuriki looked ready to pounce. His fingers flew through a lengthy series of hand seals. It took him longer than he would have liked, but the benefits of his jutsu of choice outweighed the delay. He almost didn't make it. The little blonde boy was already in the air, flying at him, when he finished. The ground in front of him shifted, a dragon's head made of molten rock rising out of it. A long neck soon followed. The red-slitted eyes of the attacking boy widened in surprise and fear. The Kyubi vessel swung his single tail forward before the lava dragon smashed into him. The child was sent flying. The dragon didn't stop its movement. It turned towards the Ichibi Jinchuriki, who was readying another wave of sand to bury him alive. The Yanbi-empowered technique pierced right through it and continued on its path, barely slowing. It headed straight for the redhead. The sand surged to protect its master, but it did him little good. It barely cushioned the impact before he was thrown backwards. The dragon turned once more. This time it was headed towards where the two Kage were standing. They quickly moved out of the way. The dragon flew out of the room and dissipated. Rushi ran along the path it cleared for him. Nobody tried to stop him. Only the sand twitched around him and he thought he heard a shout of, "Mother wants blood." Then he was out on the street. The ballroom Naruto picked himself up from the wall he had landed in. Everything hurt, but his tenant was already taking care of the damage. That filthy monkey, the Kyubi seethed. Kill him for it. He's running, the boy pointed out. And nobody asked your opinion. Impudent brat. I love you too. He ignored the demon's growling and got to his feet. He looked around. He couldn't see Roshi anywhere. That was strange. Where did the Iwa Jinchuriki go? Mother wants blood. Gaara's voice was distorted, but Naruto recognized it anyway. His friend was completely enveloped in sand, taking the form of a miniature tanuki. Only the tail was missing, but it was slowly forming from the sand lying around. It didn't take a genius to realize what was happening. Naruto cursed. If the Shikaku got released here. He didn't want to think of the implication. Then the sand monstrosity moved and started running. Come back so I can kill you. Naruto cursed again. If Gaara let out his tenant in the village, it would be even worse. He forced his still aching legs to move and rushed after Gaara. Near the dais the Kazekage felt relieved when the Iwa Jinchuriki ran away. Finally the disastrous battle was over and they could regroup. Then he noticed Gaara being completely out of control. Oh crap. The nightmare hadn't ended yet. Streets of Sunagakure, kill him. Shikaku demanded. I want his blood. Yes, mother, Gaara agreed. You'll get it. Let me out. I'll kill him. No, I'll kill him myself. He was in pain and that was a sensation he wasn't used to. Even when Naruto had wounded him during their fight it didn't hurt that badly. He wanted revenge and that thought drowned all others. A small part of his mind insisted that he shouldn't be doing this, but he paid it no heed. He was interested only in the escaping form of Roshi and nothing else mattered. Around him the citizens of Suna who didn't flee yet were scattering out of his path. He ignored their squeals of terror. They were insects to him. Insignificant. The Kazekage Manor was near to the center of Suna, just next to the administration tower. There was a lot of ground to be covered before they left the inhabited area. Roshi was running fast and Gaara found that his sand-covered body moved too slowly to catch up with him. He created a platform of floating sand and jumped onto it. He commanded it to move forward. He immediately started gaining on the runaway Yonbi Jinchuriki. Roshi noticed that as well and quickened his pace. He managed to get to the outskirts of Suna before the deranged Ichibi vessel reached him. Obnoxious little brat, the Satori commented. Roshi agreed wholeheartedly. He turned around, running his hands through seals. Gaara jumped down from his platform, his monstrous sand arms reaching forward to grab the Iwa ninja. The sand between them melted, forming a snarling dragon's head. Gaara saw it, but was too slow to dodge. Or perhaps he didn't care, already having forgotten his earlier encounter with this very technique. He merely crossed his arms in front of him and summoned more sand for his protection. The dragon slammed into it. It didn't gain the speed necessary to break through the Shikaku's defense, but it managed to throw the sand monster backwards. Gaara landed on his back painfully. He managed to avoid further injuries, but the old ones were irritated and began hurting more than when they were first inflicted. Let me out. I'll kill that filthy monkey, Shikaku screamed. Yes, mother, Gaara answered. He didn't even have to use the forced sleep technique. He simply closed his eyes and succumbed to unconsciousness. I'm free. I'm finally free. Shikaku gloated. He picked himself up from the ground, his sand body slowly reforming and growing even bigger than it was before. I'm going to squash you, he promised the startled Roshi. So the Tanuki is out, Yonbi commented. He's even crazier than I remember him. What does it mean for us? The Iwa ninja asked. Duck. Roshi didn't waste a single moment to jump out of his position. It wasn't a moment too soon. He barely managed to vacate the area before it was hit by an air pressure bullet. Sand was thrown into the air, obscuring the vision of everybody around. The Kyuubi is coming, the Yonbi informed its host. Before Roshi could form a thought, it continued. Yes, I know it isn't good, so we should just run. And don't worry, they won't be following us. The Ichibi would turn on him. Before they're finished with each other, we'll be long gone. You sure? Of course, the Satori rolled his eyes, and now run. We don't have much time. Roshi obeyed. Naruto arrived just in time to see Shikaku fire the air bullet. He noticed the Iwa Jinchuriki dodging. He looked around, trying to guess when the next attack would come from. He didn't expect it to come in the form of sand enveloping his legs, trying to squash him. He flared the Kyuubi's chakra, sending it flying. Gaara! He shouted. The sand monstrosity turned towards him. So here you are, worm, the giant snarled. Come so I can crush you. Shikaku, the Ninetail said. Really? Naruto retorted sarcastically. I wouldn't have noticed. Cut your sarcasm, the fox chided, we have no time for it. It's sometimes said that Shikaku is the god of the desert and you are about to find out why. Is it just me or do you really sound scared? Naruto mentally raised an eyebrow. And what's the big deal? We beat him once before. He didn't have time to fully unleash his power back then, the kitsune pointed out. Even so, you have 8 more tails, the blonde reminded him. And he has the whole desert at his command, the Ninetails retorted. We can beat him, but you must be careful. Don't let a single grain of his sand get close to you. You don't want to know what even one of those specks can do to your intestines. I understand. You better do. And watch out, here he comes. Sure enough, the sand monster was walking towards them, murder in its strange yellow eyes. Naruto considered his options. Last time he had managed to win through his use of explosive tags. He had none of those now. He had no weapon at all, his only kunai lost after Roshi's dragon smashed him into the wall. He couldn't even remember when he had dropped the Anbu's sword. Probably when Roshi had first hit him. He looked around for anything he could use, but shinobi weapons and equipment generally didn't lie at every corner even in shinobi villages, so he found nothing. He only came to the discovery they were still in the residential area. I have to take this elsewhere, he realized. The stone plateau around the village had already served him once, so he decided to use it again. He jumped high into the air, using his chakra to stick to a wall of a building before jumping again, this time reaching the roof. The houses on the outskirts of Suno weren't as big as the hive-like structures near the center of the village, so the Shikaku still towered over him. One giant fist came down to smash him, but he didn't wait for it to fall. He ran across the rooftops out of the village. Shikaku predictably followed. Come back. The sand demon shouted. I'll get you back for last time. Try it. Naruto shouted over his shoulder. The only response he got was a wave of sand rising in front of him. His eyes widened. It was huge. Far bigger than anything he saw Gaara use before. I told you the Shikaku is a god within the desert, Kyuubi reminded him. Better tell me how to get out of this, the blonde shot back. I thought you already knew. Wake Gaara up, Naruto stated. Exactly. But that doesn't solve the tsunami. You have my power at your disposal and can't think of anything? Kyuubi sounded angry. Well, angrier than usual. You're even more pathetic than I originally thought. Just shut up. He had no time to talk with his tenant now. The huge sand wave was almost on top of him. He concentrated his chakra cloak in the front and jumped straight into the approaching mass of sand, releasing his power in one burst. The sand was thrown in all directions, but began reforming quickly. Naruto barely had time to run through the gap. Did I mention that Shikaku's power grows the longer he is out? The fox sounded bored. You didn't. Naruto scowled. And you seem to be enjoying yourself quite a lot. Of course, the beast grinned. You're about to realize you cannot take him with your meager skills and would have to allow me control. Not going to happen. Don't be so sure, whelp. And don't even try to challenge me to another game of chicken. Wouldn't dream of it. The conversation was cut short by the sand under him shifting, about to form another wave. I'm going to kill everybody. Shikaku shouted. Naruto swore. If the Ichibi unleashed his sand on Suna. Why do you even care? Kyubi asked. The blonde didn't bother to answer. He had to act fast to save the village. This isn't your home, the fox added. Naruto quickly considered his options. There was no way he could wake Gaara in time. But maybe he could distract Shikaku and make him forget about Suna. He took a deep breath. He had only read about this technique before, never attempting to perform it. But he knew the proper hand seals and the tips on molding his chakra. And none of his other jutsu would have the desired effect. His fingers flashed through the unfamiliar sequence. He lifted his joined hands to his mouth and exhaled. Flames erupted from his mouth. He didn't bother with the fine details of the technique, foregoing the forming of the proper shape to gain longer reach. He was surprised how well he was doing. The flames were long and hot, holding together in a snake-like body. Naruto tried to direct it at Shikaku, but failed. The fire refused to bend to his will. Guess I really have to practice, he thought. Fortunately his initial aim wasn't too far off. The flame projectile hit the ground next to Shikaku's feet, sending droplets of molten glass flying. It didn't hurt the demon, but it had caught its attention. Try fighting somebody who can fight back first, you coward. Naruto shouted at the top of his lungs. I'm not a coward. The blonde allowed himself a smile. The Ichibi sure was predictable. Then come and get me, if you can, he taunted. The monstrous tanuki roared and sprung forward. Naruto ran in front of him, leading the demon away from Suna. Kazekage manner. The Kazekage sighed. Covertly, of course. It wouldn't do for the village leader if he was seen distraught by his subordinates. The fighting had finally died down after the IWA delegation ran away. Now the worst danger had passed. The real headache began. The question was, what should he do now? Should he consider Sunagakure already at war, or was there still hope for a peaceful solution? Taking a look around, he decided it was unlikely. He turned to the group of Jounin and ANBU gathered around. Assemble a search party, he commanded. Follow the IWA Shinobi. Act if you have the opportunity, but don't engage the Tsuchikage himself. Understood. Scatter. The ballroom. Tenzo could finally breathe freely. The IWA Jounin who was threatening to kill him if he lowered his guard for just a moment was finally gone. He took a look around. Where was his team? He had noticed Naruto chasing after the IWA Jinchuriki and Gaara, but he knew nothing about Hana and Hataru. He was torn. Which one of his students should he try saving first? Naruto was facing two powerful opponents, but at least he was conscious and relatively uninjured. The girls could be slowly dying under the debris for all he knew. And there wasn't like he could do much against such powerful demon vessels. He decided to trust Naruto to handle himself for a while and went to search for his other students. He tried asking first. The silver hair of Kakashi shone like a beacon not far from him. Dog, he called his friend's ANBU codename. Have you seen my students? Well, the man said, wiping off the blood flowing from a multitude of minor scratches. Naruto just ran off chasing after the two monsters. I noticed that, he replied. Everybody did. Did you see my other students? I saw the Inuzuka with her family, Kakashi offered, but it was near the beginning of the battle. And Hataru? I don't know, the ANBU shrugged. Lioness took care of her. Both men turned startled to the speaker. Hokage-sama. They both fell to their knees before their leader. At ease, Sarutobi said. Don't worry about Hana and Hataru, they got out of this safely. Only Naruto is still in trouble. Go to him, and dog, you go as well. I'd go myself, but I have to smooth the diplomacy. They both bowed and departed. They ran alongside each other through the mostly deserted streets of Sunagakure. Only a handful of shinobi were running around, pretending they knew what they were doing. It was easy to follow the path the three Jinchuriki had taken. The tracks of the giant tanuki were unmistakable. They lead straight ahead to the edge of the village. Soon they came within sight. Outside Sunagakure, Naruto stopped when he reached the bottom of the cliffs surrounding Suna. It took him only a moment to determine that he wouldn't be able to climb up in time. He'd have to face Shikaku here and now. All I have to do is wake Gaara. I can do it. But how? He's covered in so much sand. He couldn't think of any technique that would help him here. Guess I'll have to use brute force. He concentrated on turning his chakra to wind. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. He imagined his body to be a large drill, the blades of wind whirling around him. Much to his surprise, the chakra around him started to move in circles. He didn't stop to ponder on it. He had a demon to defeat and a friend to save. He leapt forward. Shikaku tried to hit him while he was airborne, but Naruto's movement aided by the Kyuubi was too fast for him. The blonde flew through the air and slammed right into Shikaku's chest. The sharpened chakra pierced the sand body. It was hard and solid, but he got deep inside. It wasn't deep enough. He couldn't see Gaara's body. The sand around him tightened, threatening to squeeze the life out of him. He flared his chakra and the grains were pushed away. He forced himself to move forward. Nice situation you got us in, the kitsune commented. Naruto ignored him. Gaara! He shouted. Gaara! Can you hear me? With Gaara, something shook him. It wasn't enough to rouse him completely, but it sent him into the realm between dreams and waking. What was it? He mused idly. Nothing, Mother replied. Go back to sleep. If Mother said it was nothing, then it was nothing. He didn't close his eyes, because they were already closed, and started drifting back to sleep. Then he heard something. He neared wakefulness once more. What was it? Ah, now he could hear it better. Somebody was calling his name. Who was it? He knew that voice, he was sure of it, if he could just remember. Sleep, child. Mother sounded stern and displeased. He should obey her. Gaara. The voice sounded again, this time closer. Sleep. Mother ordered. He didn't like being ordered around. He opened his eyes out of spite. No. Mother screeched. I won't go back. He felt tired and hurt, and something was forcing his eyes closed. It would be so easy to give in and sleep a little longer. Gaara. Can you hear me? Naruto. It was Naruto. His friend was calling for him. He tried to answer, to open his eyes. No. Shikaku yelled. You can't force me back. You bet I can, the Jinchuriki answered. He pushed hard to regain control over his body, but the Ichibi refused to let go. A battle of will started and Gaara was exhausted before it even began. But he couldn't give up. His friend needed him. He couldn't let Naruto face Shikaku alone. He knew the blonde was strong, but Shikaku was god of the desert. He willed with all his might to stay awake, to force the Ichibi back into the seal, but his strength was rapidly leaving him. Then suddenly the Shikaku's power faltered. No! The demon screamed. Gaara seized the opportunity. He forced his eyes open and concentrated on the waking world. No! Shikaku screamed again, but his voice sounded weaker. His hold over Gaara was slipping. The giant sand body began falling apart. He started falling as well, but he called on the sand to slow his descent. Gaara! Naruto exclaimed. He was still enveloped in Kyuubi's chakra, but his tail had already disappeared. The chakra cloak was dissipating, and when he reached him, only his eyes remained red, but even they quickly morphed to blue. Are you alright, Gaara? The redhead didn't understand why the blonde was asking him. It was he who had just tried to kill him, so why? You're wounded. Naruto exclaimed. Come on, let's get you to the hospital. Why? The tattooed youth asked. Why what? Naruto looked into Gaara's dark-rimmed eyes, puzzled. Why do you care? The expression on Gaara's face spoke of total befuddlement. Because you're my friend, the blonde stated. Why wouldn't I? I just tried to kill you, the tattooed youth explained. That was Shikaku, Naruto replied. And we really should be going. That we should, a familiar voice stated. Only now he noticed Tenzo along with one Konoha Anbu standing close. He also spotted 2 trees growing near. He puzzled together what had occurred here. Thank you. You're welcome, his guardian replied. But can you please refrain from pulling such stunts in the future? I can't do that every day. He gestured to the trees. Creating them left him in a state of near exhaustion. Mokuton was created from earth and water, and while there was earth in abundance everywhere, there was hardly any water in the desert. Believe me, Naruto answered solemnly, I don't want to do this ever again. That's good to hear. And now let's get back. Yes, let's head back, Naruto replied. He stood up with Gaara still in his arms, swayed on his feet and fainted. He landed on top of the other boy. Aren't they cute together? Kakashi commented. Keep your comments to yourself, Tenzo chided. He picked Naruto from the ground. Take Gaara and let's go. The plateau above Suna-Rushi met with the remains of the IWA delegation not far from the village. There were pitifully few of them, only 8 counting him. So here you are, the Tsuchikage stated. Yes, he answered evenly. Inside he seethed. They had left him behind without as much as asking him to act as their rear guard, and now they acted like nothing had ever happened. And for them it probably didn't. He was just a Jinchuriki, a living weapon, a being less than human in their eyes, so what did it matter if he died doing his duty? Too late to run now, the Satori commented. Shut up, he sent back. Why so rude? I only echo your thoughts. And that's exactly why you should shut up. Get moving, everybody, Oanoki commanded. Cutting short Rushi's conversation with his tenant. Suna undoubtedly already sent their hunters, so we should put as much ground between ourselves and them as possible. What about water? Kajiramaru asked. It was unheard of a genin to question their Kage, at least in IWA, but everybody was so stressed out that they didn't care about protocol. There's an oasis not too far. If we move quickly, we can reach it. And now go. With those words the midget man jumped forward, his entourage following him. Great Wind Desert, what was that supposed to mean? Sasori shouted. His usually calm and collected demeanor was gone. What are you referring to? Orochimaru's face remained calm and impassive. The stunt you just pulled. The puppeteer was uncharacteristically angry. What stunt? The Konoha Nuke-nin raised an eyebrow. Don't play dumb, the masked ninja scoffed. I know you caused the mess. I don't know what are you talking about. The snake Sannin looked like the embodiment of innocence. Cut it, Orochimaru. The former Suna ninja was in no mood for his partner's mind games. Do you think I'd believe that a comatose patient suddenly woke up and attacked the one who put him in that state? What kind of idiot do you have me for? And what if I did it? What does it matter? Orochimaru's manner was nonchalant. It destroyed our plan, that's why it matters. Destroyed? The pale man raised an eyebrow. I merely sped it up. Sped it up? Sasori hissed. Don't be ridiculous. You completely botched it. I'd like to see you explain it to our leader. He'll understand it. The taller man sounded completely self-assured. I wouldn't be so sure, the shorter one growled. More likely he'll let you know the power of pain. You're a pessimist. More like a realist, Sasori corrected. And I'm beginning to doubt your loyalties, Orochimaru. I assure you I'm loyal to the Akatsuki, the pale man lied through his teeth. It's not me you have to convince, the puppet master pointed out. I know. And he did. But he didn't plan on convincing Pain anyway. His immortality jutsu was finally finished, all that was left was obtaining a good body. And he knew about one, the newest addition to Akatsuki. He had always coveted the Uchiha's Sharingan and more so the Magenkyo version. Its current owner would protest, but that didn't concern him. Sure, Uchiha Itachi was good, but he would be no match for the greatest of the legendary Sannin, as Orochimaru referred to himself. Soon all the techniques in the world would be within his reach. Then he would go to his newly built Hidden Sound Village, which despite being still under construction was already a formidable fortress. The Akatsuki had provided generous funding in hope of using it as their basis of operation. Fools the lot of them. Orochimaru made sure that the Sound Shinobi were loyal to him and him only. The Akatsuki would have to go homeless, at least until Pain finally conquered the Hidden Rain, but Orochimaru couldn't see it happening anytime soon. The self-proclaimed god had an awful lot of trouble with mere mortals. He allowed himself a small smile. Yes, any trouble he would get into for this were outweighed by the benefits. He didn't care for the Akatsuki's agenda one bit. He had his own goals and one of them was the destruction of Konoha. He had originally joined the organization in hopes of getting help with it, but they were moving too slow for his tastes. Orochimaru never liked waiting for what he desired, Sarutobi-sensei's lessons in patience never etching into the young prodigy's brain. He wanted to see Konoha burn and he wanted to see it soon. Having it weaken in a war against IWA was a good way to accomplish it. He would have preferred to do it himself, but Otogakure was still too weak. But even if his plan failed, simply seeing Sensei's face in the moment he realized his foolish dreams of peace had just crumbled was priceless. The Konoha Nuke was going to savor the memory for a long time to come. Yes, life was good. Kazekage's office. It was well past midnight, close to the morning in fact, but the leader of Sunagakure was still up. Even if he already knew the situation had gone to hell, he didn't realize it would be so bad. The retrieval teams had finally finished going through the rubble and were now trying to identify the victims. Many of the bodies were destroyed during the fight of the three Jinchuriki, but those they recognized were bad enough. Beside the Wind Country Daimyo they retrieved a nephew of the Earth Country Daimyo, cousin of the Fire Country Daimyo, sister of the Bear Country Daimyo, fiancé of the Rain Country Daimyo's son and two high-ranking members of Grass Country Daimyo's court. There was also somebody who looked like a minor noble from Lightning Country, though it was still unconfirmed, and somebody from Waterfall. The list wasn't finished yet. The Kazekage dreaded to think of who would appear next. There was a knock on the door and the Kazekage looked up. What was it now? He doubted that it would be good news. He couldn't imagine what news would count as good now. Kazekage-sama? It was his secretary. What is it now? He was hard-pressed not to growl. But he couldn't. He was the Kazekage, their leader. He had to present a facade of calmness in the face of trying times, so his shinobi wouldn't lose their hearts. Hokage-sama came to see you. So the other Kage wasn't sleeping as well. Somehow the thought failed to improve his mood today. Send him in. He wasn't in the formal setting of his audience chamber, He wasn't even wearing his full robes, but this wasn't the time to care about protocol. The door opened and Sarutobi walked in. He was once again in his pristine robes of state. The Kazekage idly wondered how many sets he got and why he even cared. The ones he had worn at the banquet were beyond repair. "Greetings, Kazekage Dano," the older man began. "I hope I'm not inconveniencing you." "Not at all," he answered truthfully. He welcomed any interruption from his rather depressing routine. "I trust your people are well, Hokage Dano." "Those who survived this long will be all right," the older man answered gravely. The Kazekage didn't know what to say to it, but Sarutobi saved him by continuing. "But it isn't what I came to talk to you about." "What is?" Somehow he couldn't imagine it would be something good. "My shinobi reported to me some rather disturbing things about the person who started the fighting," Sarutobi announced. "You mean Akatsuchi?" "I've heard something as well, but the report was sketchy and far-fetched," the blue-robed man replied. "I have it confirmed by several trustworthy witnesses. Akatsuchi acted more like a puppet than a human, moving even when gravely wounded." The Kazekage took only a moment to ponder over it. He did consider the possibility himself. "You mean a third party was involved?" "It is possible," the Hokage confirmed. "The Tsuchikage wouldn't have sacrificed his own grandson in this way. For all he ever did, he loves his family dearly." He looked surprised when Akatsuchi appeared. And Akatsuchi himself couldn't even get out of bed, unless the medics completely botched his diagnosis. "Yes, Kazekage Dano, I believe someone else was involved. Now the question is who and why," the Kazekage muttered. "I think the why is clear," the professor answered gravely. "War," the Kazekage voiced what had been going through his mind since the first blow. "Exactly. Even if we prove somebody else started it, our daimyos are going to call for revenge." The list of casualties grew heavy in his hand. There might still be a chance to turn their vengeance against those truly responsible, Sarutobi suggested. "If we analyzed Akatsuchi's corpse, we might discover something. First we have to find his body." The Kazekage's voice was bitter. "Is there a problem?" "It was probably destroyed during the fight," the leader of Hidden Sand explained. "Even if we determined which one of the lumps of coal is him, I doubt there would be any traces left." "What about his hospital room?" the Hokage asked gravely. "It was empty," the Kazekage answered. "My specialists couldn't find any trace of what occurred there." "That's too bad." Sarutobi looked grim. "That it is." There was a moment of heavy silence. Both village leaders were remembering the last war and guessing what the next would bring. "When the war starts," the Kazekage asked, "will the treaty between Suna and Konoha still hold?" "I can't tell what our daimyo is going to do, but unless he orders otherwise, we will face the times ahead as allies." "That's good to hear." It was the first good news tonight. Suna will be glad to stand beside Konoha. The Hotel Hana didn't sleep the whole night. First she had to drag her little brother, her mother and her dog to safety, but thankfully the Suna genin helped her. Then she used her still insufficient medical knowledge to make sure they'll survive. Thankfully they were only knocked out, their wounds superficial. Then she had to take care of her brother. It took a lot of hugging before Kiba broke out of his stupor. The boy then started crying and remained that way for over an hour before he cried himself into sleep. She tucked him into the bed and went to look for her teammates. She found them in their room, roughened up and completely exhausted, but all of them thankfully alive and in one piece. Only then she could grab a couple of hours of sleep for herself. She thought she only closed her eyes for a moment when she was woken by a wet tongue in her face. The Himura siblings were reminding her that they didn't get any food or water since yesterday. She picked herself up and went to find them some. When she got back, her mother was awake as well. "What happened yesterday?" she asked. Hana quickly retold what had occurred after she passed out. Some said when her daughter finished. At least we're all alive. Then why do you look so grim? Her daughter inquired. And why would I not? Do you realize what all that means? War? Precisely, the clan head nodded vigorously. War. And do you know what that means? I can imagine. Hana tried. You only think you can imagine, Some corrected her. If you think what happened to your first team was bad, now things are going to be so much worse. I know, I already lived through one. I hoped you two wouldn't have to, but that's not going to happen. You mean even Kiba? Hana was taken aback. Yes, even little Kiba, she confirmed. But he still has over 3 years until graduation, the younger woman pointed out. Maybe the war would be over by then. He'd have 3 years in peacetime, her mother corrected. During wartime, graduation age is lowered to make up for our losses. He would be graduating in a year and the fighting would be still on by that time. Hana didn't know what to say to that. She was saved from having to answer by Kiba awakening. I'm hungry, he announced. You always are, his mother replied like nothing was wrong. Hana didn't understand how she could look so calm after all that was said. Let's make breakfast. I'm hungry too. They ate in silence. Kiba concentrated on wolfing down his food, Hana not trusting her voice. I've been thinking, Some began when they finished. It's time for you to get your own dog. Really? Kiba jumped high in the air. Yes, Some confirmed. Yay! He punched the air. I'm going to have my own dog. Did you hear, sis? I'm going to be an awesome ninja in no time, you'll see. I'm sure you will, Hana replied subdued. Kiba, even in his elation, picked up on it. What's wrong, sis? Nothing, she lied. She didn't want to disturb her brother's moment of happiness. It might be the last one in a long time to come. Did something happen to you yesterday? Kiba inquired, suddenly serious. It was bad there, wasn't it? It was, she nodded, but I'm all right. Then why are you so sad? Did something happen to your team? No. Don't pry like that, Kiba, Some interrupted. Hana doesn't want to talk about it, can't you see? You'll find out soon enough. Come on, he pouted. Tell me, what is so bad? The two women looked at each other. Should they tell or not? Kiba, for all his shouting and bragging, was actually a clever boy and he would figure things out soon. That battle yesterday, Some began, it might have started a war. That's bad, isn't it? Only 2 grim faces answered him. The next room Naruto slowly opened his eyes. He still felt tired, but the sun shining into his face insisted he woke up. He groaned and lifted himself on his elbows. One look showed he was alone in the room. That was new. Usually when he woke up after being wounded his teammates were lying on the other beds around him. He wondered what could that mean. I hope they are all right. Before he could decide whether he should go look for them, the door opened and Tenzo entered. So you're finally awake, he greeted. As you can see, the genin replied. Did I sleep that long? Not really. It's only almost noon. How are the girls? Naruto inquired. They're both alive and in one piece, though Hataru is wounded. That's good to hear, the blonde smiled. May I go visit them? You may, but you should wash first. There was no time yesterday. You have blood all over yourself. Okay. Naruto got out of bed and headed to the bathroom. Bathrooms in Suna were nothing like the ones in Konoha. Water was a rare commodity in the desert and it mustn't be wasted. It took him quite some time to learn to use them, but now he took the washcloth with practiced ease, dipped it in the small covered basin and started scrubbing himself. The smears of blood, sweat and dust now came off easily. Well, all of them but one. One blood-red line on the back of his right hand refused to disappear no matter how hard he scrubbed it. What takes you so long? Tenzo called from the next room. That one smear won't come off, the blonde answered. Is it something so bad that nobody should see you with it? Naruto considered the tiny line. It wasn't anything much, it looked like some child had drawn a line with a liner. Really nothing to be bothered about. Except the fact he had no idea how he got it. He was fairly sure there was no kid with paints around him yesterday. Not really, he answered coming out of the bathroom. Let's go. Yet another room. Hataru groaned. She felt like somebody had dragged through the meat grinder. She slowly opened her eyes. She squinted in the bright morning sun. Then the angle of the rays registered and she realized she couldn't really call the daytime morning anymore. So you're up now? A voice asked from somewhere she couldn't see. You go? The girl slowly moved to get a look at her companion. Who else? The woman smiled. What are you doing here? Hataru inquired. Just lying around. I can't really get up now. She pointed to her bandaged leg. I mean, aren't you supposed to be? You know, the younger Kunoichi didn't know how to finish the sentence without saying something she wasn't supposed to say. On duty? Yugugo completed for her. I'm excused for medical reasons. I can't believe we actually got out of there. Hataru changed the topic. How are the others, anyway? Still alive, from what I heard. I don't know more myself. I'm a bit out of the loop here. A moment of silence passed between the two Uzumaki females. The younger one broke it first. Wouldn't you get in trouble for yesterday? If I did, the ANBU shrugged, would already know about it. It seems like nobody noticed anything, which I know is not true. There was another moment of silence. I feel completely useless, Hataru admitted. Why? Her cousin raised an eyebrow. I couldn't do anything yesterday. Her voice was filled with self-contempt. You were wounded, Yugugo consoled her. You couldn't have done anything. I got wounded fighting some of the weakest opponents, the girl reminded her. There were no weak ones, the more experienced Kunoichi pointed out. Still, I should have been better. Her issues with self-worth were acting up again and they showed no intention of disappearing anytime soon. Don't sell yourself short, you're advancing nicely, the older woman consoled her. But it's not enough. Hataru sounded disgusted with herself. In ninja life, there are always situations where even your best isn't enough, Yugugo informed her. You can't do anything about it, only strive to become stronger, so it won't happen next time. How do you deal? Hataru wanted to know. Everybody has to find their own way, the older woman explained. You still haven't gotten anybody killed, so count yourself lucky. That's cold comfort, Hataru objected. I know it is, Yugugo nodded, but I have nothing better. The morgue Temari found herself guarding the Wind Country daimyo's daughter even after the battle was over. The girl refused to leave her even after she had completely torn her clothes while pushing her through the window. Thankfully she wasn't clutching her arm anymore. The young noblewoman had completely different things on her mind now. The princess was currently standing over the corpse of her father, wailing and crying her eyes out. She had been at it for an hour already and she showed no sign of quieting down anytime soon. Temari secretly admired her endurance, though outwardly she scoffed at her being such a crybaby. She would never admit that she felt uneasy spending so much time in a morgue. The door opened suddenly, the creaking of the hinges resounding too loud in the underground chamber, interrupting the young noblewoman's lamenting. Temari almost jumped, but that would be unbecoming of a ninja. She turned to see who was coming. What if it was an enemy? 2 days ago she would have laughed at the idea, how would anybody unwelcome get into the heart of Suna? Now she wasn't so confident anymore. After the battle at the banquet, she didn't feel safe in her own home anymore. The young Kunoichi straightened when she recognized her father. Even the princess ceased her wailing in the presence of the Kazekage. "Accept our most sincere condolences, Lady Kenriman," the leader of Hidden Sand Village spoke solemnly. How he managed to keep a straight face Temari didn't know, but there was a reason he became the Kazekage. "Thank you, Kazekage-sama," the young noblewoman answered between sobs. "I assure you that Suna will serve you faithfully just like we served your father." The double meaning was completely lost on the grieving daughter. "Thank you." The princess tried to smile, but failed. "I don't even know what I should be doing," she admitted, "but I know that I want to avenge my father. IWA cannot be allowed to get away with such heinous act. Would you assist me with this?" "We will, Lady Kenriman," he promised with conviction, or should I say Daimyo-sama now? He paused for a moment, before continuing in a more serious tone. "But you must understand, your father dreamed of peace and didn't support our military much. I don't know how much would we be able to do." "I know," the princess nodded sadly. "I too dream of peace, but it isn't possible anymore. I'll give you anything you need for the war." The Kazekage smiled behind his veil. If he knew this was all it was going to take. "Thank you for your generosity, Kenriman-heim," he bowed humbly. "We will do everything in our power to avenge your honorable father." "I trust you with my vengeance," the girl said with fire in her eyes. "I want to see IWA burn. If it's your wish, we'll make it happen, princess. If you excuse me now, I have to see to my troops." "You are excused, Kazekage-sama. You know what to do better than me." The leader of Suna bowed and left. A smile was playing on his lips. It was very fortunate for them to have a little girl easily manipulated for their daimyo. With any luck he would be able to restore Suna to its former glory. Now he had a lot of work to do, like reactivating the ninja he had to send to early retirement due to the budget cuts and putting the village into war mode. Kazekage's office, even with the state Suna was currently in, some formalities had to be fulfilled. That was why the second morning after the attack the 9 finalists still present in Suna, alive, were gathered before the Kazekage. "Because some of you have to leave soon, we'll make this brief. The ones that performed well enough to deserve the rank of Chunin are those, Akatsuchi, Ayum Daiki, Genasuke, Inazuka Hana, Kamizuru Kajiramaru, Kuratsuchi, Yuzuki Hataru, Uzumaki Naruto. If somebody doesn't like it, well, better luck next time. That's all, you're excused." The lucky and unlucky finalists filed out of the office. Hataru stopped in the hallway. Her wound started bothering her again. "Does it hurt much?" Hana asked. "It's not that bad," the purple-haired girl answered, "if I could lie in bed for a week." "Too bad we're leaving today," Naruto grimaced. "So you're leaving already?" The blonde turned to the speaker. "Gaara." He smiled. "What are you doing here? Are you alright?" "The Kazekage wanted to speak to me," the Suna Jinchuriki explained. "And I'm mostly healed." "That's good to hear," the freshly promoted Chunin answered. "Anyway, do you know my teammates? This is Hana and this is Hataru." "Hello," the girls replied reluctantly. Especially Hataru couldn't still forget the monster the small redhead had turned into. "Pleased to meet you," the tattooed youth answered. Since his voice was flat as ever, they couldn't tell whether he really meant it. "Sorry I didn't come yesterday," the blonde apologized, "but they didn't let me. Everybody is crazy about security with what happened at the banquet." "That's all right," the other boy replied. "I wasn't in the mood for visitors anyway." "But you are better now?" Naruto inquired. "Yes. I meant to ask, why did you care so much back then?" No further clarification was needed. Both knew very well what Gaara was talking about. "I told you already." Naruto gave him a look usually reserved for slow children. "Because you're my friend." That is the same, the redhead pointed out. Why are you my friend? Naruto ran a hand through his hair. How can I explain that? Because you reminded me of myself of a few years back? Does it make sense? It doesn't, does it? Well, I don't think friendship is something that can be explained. It either is or it isn't. I'll remember that, the redhead answered. Konohagakure, the journey back felt too long to them. Truth be told, it was much longer than their journey there, because they had to drag so many wounded with them. But that wasn't the only reason the travel felt endless. They all now realized painfully that they were a small group in potentially hostile territory and they could be attacked anytime. Every one of them let out a huge breath when the desert finally gave way to the green prairies and forests of river country. Most of them had never been so glad to see the walls of Konoha again, the only exceptions among them being the war veterans. The party walked through the gates. The Chunin at guard, twice more of them than was usually stationed there, were extremely grateful to see the Hokage back. The messenger birds have carried in the reports of the battle days ago, and since then everybody was on edge. They all looked like they expected Konoha to be invaded any time. But now the Sandaime was back, they felt like they didn't need to fear anymore. The professor would surely know what to do. Sarutobi let the party disband. Everybody went wherever they needed to be, for most of them it was the hospital. He headed to his office. For once he didn't even think of the pile of documents that must have accumulated during his absence. Hokage's office. Sarutobi barely started on his paperwork, when he realized he had a visitor. "Did you ever hear about doors, Jiraiya?" he asked. "Sorry, sensei," the toad sage answered from his spot on the windowsill. "It reminds me of something, but I can't put a finger on it." "Cut your joking, Jiraiya," the older man chided. "I'm in no mood for it today." "I noticed," the self-proclaimed super pervert answered, jumping from his perch. "I thought you might need some cheering up." "You thought wrong," the Sandaime scowled. "And if you're finished, we have serious matters to discuss." "That we do," the big man agreed. "I have some news about Orochimaru." "Orochimaru," the Hokage scoffed. "Is that everything you concentrate on? I noticed lately that you've been neglecting everything else." Now, sensei," Jiraiya lifted his arms in defense. "Isn't it a bit harsh?" "I don't think so," Sarutobi stated. "Tell me, what do you know about Suna's Jinchuriki?" "Not much," the toad sage scratched his head. "He's young and they haven't used him yet, he was revealed only recently." "Strange thing," the older man said, "is that apparently all of Suna knew." "Why didn't you? Don't you have anybody there?" "Suna is hard to infiltrate," the spymaster, though that was currently in question, explained. "Nobody moves there and the locals are extremely suspicious of strangers. Every travel is easily monitored. Add in the fact that it's fairly small and everybody knows everybody else by sight, it's every spy's nightmare. Ever since my last agent there died 6 years ago, I barely got any information from there. I would accept that excuse from everybody else, but you should be better than that." "Perhaps I should," the long-haired man sighed. "I'm glad you agree," Sarutobi said sternly. "So are you going to improve?" "Yes, sensei." "And now, what do you know about what happened in Suna?" "Not much more that is generally known, but I've heard some disconcerting rumors. I came upon them when I was digging around Orochimaru." "Orochimaru again," the Sandaime sighed. "So what is it? Remember the supposed new village in Rice Fields country? How Naruto's team fought the Kaguya?" "Yes," Sarutobi nodded. "What about it?" "I couldn't confirm it, but there are strong hints that Orochimaru is involved," the white-haired Sannin dropped the bombshell. "I see." The Hokage frowned. "That's disturbing indeed, but how is that connected to the mess in Suna?" "I'm getting to it. There is the question where Orochimaru got the funds to start a new village. He left Konoha in a hurry and he wasn't that rich to begin with. And you know something about that? Jiraiya nodded. From what I gathered, the new village was visited by strange people. They were all masked, but were wearing the same uniform. Those who saw them said they carried themselves like very powerful ninja and that their leader seemed to defer to one of them. Orochimaru actually deferring to somebody? Sarutobi's eyebrows rose. Then he scowled. That's a fearsome thought. Exactly, the spymaster agreed. I couldn't get much out of them, but it seems like there is a powerful organization with lots of money, who knows how much members, and completely mysterious objectives. If Orochimaru is indeed part of them, it cannot be possibly anything good. Sarutobi considered his students' words. What little they knew about Akatsuchi's condition hinted at the use of a powerful kenjutsu. And Orochimaru was an expert on those. They could very well be behind the mess in Suna, though there is no proof, he speculated. I'll look into it, sensei, Jiraiya promised. Do it. But there's one more thing. What thing? The self-proclaimed super pervert had a sinking feeling he wasn't going to like this. We need to gather all our strength for the war, the aged Kage announced. Jiraiya slightly paled. He can't possibly mean. You want me to stay in the village? He asked slowly. I won't be able to investigate that way. No, not you, the third shook his head. The Gamma Sennin let out a breath. I want you to find Tsunade and get her back. Now Jiraiya paled again. Really? He stuttered. Find Tsunade? Confront her? No matter how much he wanted to see the Slug Princess again, he had no desire to get punched into dirt or lower Earth orbit, depending on what mood the legendary sucker currently was in. But she wouldn't come. You know she swore she'd never return. How could I ever forget? Sarutobi sighed. But we need her. I let her wander for too long as it is. It's time for her to resume her duty. It would be better if she heard it from you, sensei. She might refrain from killing me this way. Maybe. It would, the Hokage agreed, his thoughts running along similar tracks. I'll write a letter for her. Iwagakure Ryotenbin no Oanoki didn't have a good day. After they escaped Sunagakure, they had to travel through the Great Wind Desert with almost no supplies and Sand Ninja in tow. It was an experience he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy. Well, maybe there were one or two people he would wish it on. In the end, only 4 of them made it to the Earth Country. He, his granddaughter Kuratsuchi, for which he was eternally grateful, her sensei Takashi and Rushi. The mess in Suna was a real tragedy for them. Some of their best had died in the battle. Iwa would miss them dearly in the upcoming war. He spent the whole day going over the resources of the village, counting the battle-ready shinobi in their ranks, their stocks of supplies and their defense lines. What he came up with wasn't overly optimistic. Granted, it could have been much worse, but it could have been much better as well. Despite over a decade passing since the end of the Third Great Shinobi War, the village hidden in Hirox hadn't still completely healed its wounds. Their defeat had been painful and bitter, and despite their best effort, he wasn't sure they were ready for the Fourth Great Shinobi War. His thoughts turned back to his deceased grandson. Every time he closed his eyes he saw the scene of the announcement. Akatsuchi suddenly appearing in the doorway, walking to the dais, then suddenly turning and attacking the Konoha brat. The more he thought about it, the more he was certain that it wasn't really his grandson who had disrupted the celebration. But if it wasn't him, then who? Surely somebody who wanted to cause a war, whatever he wanted to gain from it. He considered Konoha, but discarded the option. That simply wasn't like old Sarutobi. Not to mention that they suffered blows to their strength recently as well. No, Konoha wasn't it. Suna? Ridiculous. They were struggling with their daimyo's budget cuts, a war would ruin them. But it might also convince their lord to give them more money. That might be a motive, but it was quite a risky way of gaining money. They would be destroyed if it backfired. No, Suna wasn't it either. Maybe somebody who wanted them to take out each other and then finish off whoever survived? Maybe. But who? Kiri was crazy enough to pull such a stunt, but they were currently preoccupied with civil war, they didn't have the energy for anything else. Kyomo? They were strong, it might have been them. He didn't even consider the minor villages. Neither of them could measure up to the Great Five. Someone else entirely? Maybe, but what gain would there be for them? He cut the train of thought. It led nowhere, at least until he had more evidence. And even if he had the answer, it wouldn't change anything about the fact there was a war about to break out and he had a village to command. He had already gone through what he had at his disposal. He started thinking about what they would be facing. His thoughts always strayed to the Konoha Jinchuriki, in his opinion the one who had killed Akatsuchi. The feel of the demonic power, the sight of the red claw cutting into his grandson's body, the sickening crunch when his boy hit the arena wall were all things that would haunt him for years to come. He had lost another of his family to a blonde devil from Konoha. He wanted to smash something, but if he destroyed his desk again, he would have to sort through the paperwork again, and that was something he really didn't want to do ever again. He reined in his wayward thoughts. He would have to deal with that little yellow menace promptly, before he grew up to be even more dangerous. With the war looming ahead, it was even more important than before. But how to do it? Konoha would guard their weapon when they wouldn't be using him in battle. Then it would cost them too much casualties to deal with him. He filed it under Plan B. What would be Plan A? It wasn't like he could politely ask Konoha to hand him over. Or couldn't he? Kyomo once got away with something similar. He didn't really expect it to work, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. He took out his brush and started writing. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.